Escaping My Creator by Kim Mullican. Prequel to the Alpha and Omega series. This audiobook was created using artificial intelligence. The rest of the series is being performed by Stacey Dugan, who is doing a phenomenal job. However, since this book is a free gift to my fans, I could not justify the expense of hiring a professional voice actor. AI has come a long way. There are some quirks you'll notice, but hey, it's free. This is Maya's backstory, one that will fill in some blanks for her loyal fans. I thank you for listening. Now, for the story. Chapter 1. As I lay on the floor, broken into a million pieces, I cried. This wasn't what I bargained for, what I was promised, but Holly had come to me when I was vulnerable, when I was mourning the loss of my mother. I hadn't been a child, and I should have known better. She promised health and vitality. She promised freedom and power, not this. This poor excuse of an existence wasn't what I'd expected. Dogs were treated better than I was. Never given more than half a sandwich, never allowed in the sun, drained of my energy every day. I was weak and felt sick all the time. On the floor of the basement, cold, tired, and hungry, I cried for my best friend Missy, whom I would never see again. That was the deal. Become immortal and leave your mortal life behind. The mattress had been placed on the cold concrete, and a thin blanket was all I had to keep me warm, which just made the emptiness so much harder. The loss of my best friend in my life was devastating. How could I have left her behind? Squeezing my eyes shut hard, I could still see her face, her long, board-straight hair that was so dark brown it was almost black. If I focused very, very hard, I could still smell her shampoo too. I'd hugged my best friend thousands of times in our lives, and I knew what she smelled like. But now, I was forgetting. The images of her face began to blur no matter how hard I fought to recall them. My mother was gone. I'd abandoned my best friend for a better life and wound up here. The only silver lining was that my house had been magically picked up and put somewhere in this town. One day I would be able to go home. I'd be able to sleep in my bed again, have coffee and cream, take a hot shower, wear clean clothes, and not be drained every single day.
Pathetic. Quit your crying,
Holly barked.
You ungrateful wretch. I gave you life. I gave you immortality, and all you do is piss and moan.
She kicked the mattress.
Pathetic excuse of a mage.
No amount of magic was worth this. For 3 years I'd lived here. 3 years I'd stolen for her, cleaned for her, and I was treated like a dog. Yes, ma'am, I said as I sat up. I knew better than to lay there and cry. She'd kick me until I couldn't move.
We've work to do, young lady. Now get up and clean yourself up. You smell like piss and misery.
She reached down and locked her fingers with mine. Holly, no, please. I barely have any. She drained my energy every single day, and some days she got so greedy I'd black out. When our fingers locked, the sucking began, and I could feel my very essence leave me until I was weak and hollowed out.
Until you learn your craft? I can't let you run around with a loaded weapon. You could burn down my house. Why do you think the Magari makes you stay with your creator? It's not my fault you're too slow to learn the basics.
I tried and failed to hold as my very essence fled my body as the light transferred from my body to hers. When she was done, I hardly had enough energy to stand. I swayed like a drunk and grabbed the wall to steady myself.
Now go shower and get some coffee already, or we're going to be late.
She hit me with her shoulder as she passed. Wiping my eyes with the back of my hand, I trudged up the stairs to the main floor and went into the laundry room, where there was a water hose and a floor drain where I was allowed to wash up. Hot tears stung my eyes as I shivered and shook from the ice-cold water. The problem was, because Holly had drained all my energy, I didn't have enough of it to hurry or to even hold my own body temperature. Never in my human life had I wanted to murder anyone. But as a mage, living like this, I could have gone Ted Bundy on Holly 10 times over and slept like a baby. The woman was evil, and there wasn't a thing I could do about it. I was her slave, and she'd never release me. I quickly grabbed the pot of coffee and poured a cup. I drank it black with nothing in it now. I hated it that way. I usually had cream and sugar, but Holly wouldn't let me have any. Coffee? Yes, that was cheap. I could have that. Cream and sugar were a luxury I had yet to earn, at least according to Her Highness. We went to her antique store. I worked in the back, cataloging items for her while she dealt with the customers. Those customers rarely, if ever, saw me. The storage area was on the second floor and smelled like a musty, dusty attic. We went to her antique store. I worked in the back, cataloging items for her while she dealt with the customers. Those customers rarely, if ever, saw me. The storage area was on the second floor and smelled like a musty, dusty attic. This was why Holly wanted to turn me into a mage. She said I have relic blood. A relic being someone whose family has passed down memories for generations. Only my mother had no idea she was a relic, had bred with a human, and had me, someone who merely felt vibrations from certain antiques which indicated they had a level of power. Holly had spotted me in one of her stores, my fingertips hovering above a box. She stalked me and convinced me to become a mage. What I wouldn't do to go back to that very minute she approached me and walk away. I could not walk away. Holly was short, only about 5'2". I was taller and physically stronger at 5'9", but since she drained me every morning, I barely had the strength to pick up a cup of coffee, let alone swing at her. The only time she didn't drain me was when she sent me relic hunting. That's how I discovered her real hold over me. The first time, I was exhilarated to be at full strength. I left to go hunting and decided to run away. Then she called to me. A creator's power over their learner is strong. I couldn't help but go back, and when I did, she blasted me with an energy ball so strong I was unconscious for 2 days. I paid for that brief feeling of freedom, and I paid dearly. It made me rage inside. I was not a weakling. I was not a doormat. I would absolutely kill her if I knew how, no doubt about it. But I didn't know how. I didn't know one single soul in this new world other than Holly. She never let me talk to anyone. She kept me isolated on the second floor of her store, cataloging her trinkets. Little did she know, I lied on her sheet daily. Keeping from her which artifacts and antiques held the most power was the only revenge I could get, for now. Chapter 2. I heard the bell over the door chime. Holly had a customer. The rule was that I was to remain silent and out of sight. I glanced at a dagger resting atop of a box. It had an odd handle that looked like it was made of bone of some sort. Carvings flowed down the hilt. It looked like some sort of ancient language. When I picked it up, it vibrated so hard I dropped it. I froze. When Holly didn't charge up the stairs, I picked the dagger up again, this time gripping it hard. The blade had a faint glow suddenly. I studied it closer. This thing was powerful. I needed to hide it.
Girl!
Holly yelled. I nearly dropped the dagger once more. Instead, I grabbed a dust rag, wrapped it around the knife, and crammed it at the bottom of a box.
Maya!
She nearly screamed. It wasn't easy making my way down the stairs. I was so weak and so tired. I finally made it to the last step and looked for her.
Come here!
She growled. Slowing my pace to piss with her, I made my way to the counter. Standing across from her was a tall man with sandy blonde hair.
Ma'am,
he said, as he tipped an imaginary hat toward me. Then he sniffed the air. His eyes locked on mine, but only for the briefest second. What can I do for you? I croaked. His eyes were kind, but the black in them looked unnaturally predominant. Fine lines gathered at the corners of his eyes as he smiled.
Hello there, little lady. I have a bit of a quandary to which Miss Havens believes you'll be able to assist me.
He grinned and leaned in, resting his elbow on the counter. I had no idea what he said. I stared at him.
Answer him, girl.
Holly said as she smacked me in the back of the head. My blood boiled. I clenched my jaw. I would if I understood what he was asking.
So thick,
she huffed. The man stood straighter.
I'd ask you kindly not to lay your hands upon the girl in my presence. Thank you.
Holly's face burned red and she glared at me.
I do apologize, Mr. Holliday. The girl is slow. I didn't realize that before I turned her.
If she is...
He glanced at me, then back to Holly.
Slow, as you so eloquently put it. How is she supposed to be of assistance? After all, you assured me you had someone with great talent here who could help me.
Again, her face burned red. I could see the curls of her short blonde hair wiggling as she shook. She forced a sickening smile on her ugly lips, which were painted bright red. How can I help you? I asked again, hoping to keep her from getting any angrier at me. In plain English, perhaps? He nodded.
I do apologize, ma'am. You see, I have 2 stones here. I believe I have been swindled. I need to discover if either of these are of any significance. Ms. Havens here recommended your special talents.
Oh, okay. May I see them? He pulled them out of his pocket. One was a red ruby. I wasn't sure if it was real or not, but that's not what he was asking. The other was a shiny stone that was jet black. I picked them both up. Neither one is special. I placed them back on the counter. Neither have any power at all. They're neither unique in their design nor carry any magical significance. His lips spread wide.
Thank you. Thank you indeed. Now how about this one?
He pulled what looked like an ordinary chunk of rock out of his other pocket. This one hummed. Yep, this one is significant. I can't tell you how.
There's no need to tell me how. This right here, is from the Great Pyramid in Egypt.
My eyes widened. Wow! He turned to Holly.
I would like to hire your learner for a period no longer than 2 days.
Well, I can't let her go off without me,
she objected.
She is still learning, and is a danger to herself until she gets her power under control.
Mr. Holliday leaned in, smiling. His gaze locked with hers.
I'll pay you handsomely, Miss Havens.
Oh,
she gasped.
You like money, don't you?
His voice was low and flowed like syrup.
Oh, yes,
she said, gasping again. I looked at her and noticed she wasn't blinking. She was gazing as if she were looking right through the man, like she was in a trance or something.
Money and power, that's exactly what you want, is it not?
Holly nodded.
I like power. I like it a lot.
He smiled and nodded.
That's quite obvious. You like power over others the most, I believe.
I took a step back, not understanding what was going on.
Now, I'm going to take your learner, Maya, for 2 days. She is to be clean and in clean clothes when I arrive at 5. That will make you exceptionally happy. I'm going to pay you 1,000 for your trouble. Is that a deal?
She nodded. He abruptly stood straight and looked to me.
Ms. Maya, I will pick you up at 5 o'clock. Please pack an overnight bag and a comfortable pair of shoes.
Without saying another word to Holly, he turned and left the building. Holly looked at the clock, ran to the door, and turned the sign to close.
We must hurry,
she said as she shuffled back to me.
We need to get you cleaned up.
Though the guy didn't give me any weird vibes, despite his control over my heinous creator, I didn't even care if he wanted sex or something. I was just relieved to get away from Holly. I would even entertain a weird fetish if it gave me relief from her abuse. She drove so fast, my stomach churned, but we weren't going in the direction of her house. When we finally came to a stop, my lip quivered. My house, I gasped. I had not even seen it in so long. I hadn't seen it since the day Holly turned me. She opened the glove box and pulled out a key and handed it to me.
This was in your bag. I hope it works. If not, you'll have to break a window. Either way, I'll be back in 2 hours. I want you showered and packed when I get back. Do you understand?
My eyes were filled with tears.
Do you hear me?
She yelled. Yes!
Good. Get out.
God, I wanted to hit her, to hurt her in the worst way. Instead, I took the opportunity and bailed from the car, adrenaline the only thing keeping me moving. When I stepped into the sunshine, my body stopped moving. Every muscle paused and I was frozen for a moment. Then the warmth of the sun washed over me and something magical happened. I had energy. Chapter 3. I heard tires screech behind me as Holly peeled off. I couldn't believe she was leaving me alone. In my house. Finally rejuvenated, I ran to the door. My hand shook as I tried my key and relief washed over me when it turned. The house smelled stale, but I didn't care. I started throwing windows open and breathed in deeply. It was mine. One thing felt infinitely more important than showering right now, and that was food. Whatever was in the fridge would be a science experiment at this point, so I didn't even open it. I went to the cupboard and nearly cried when I saw my stash of soups. I pulled out a can of loaded potato soup, then went to the stove. I grabbed a pan, went to the sink, and nearly sobbed when the water coming out was hot. I rinsed it well, figuring it had to be dusty. I washed the pan quickly, then went to the stove, pulled the tab and opened the can, dumping the contents in the pan. The stove lit on the first try, and I finally did cry. I didn't heat it too much. With the biggest spoon I could find in the drawer, I devoured every single last drop of the hearty soup. Full for the first time in a year, I made my way up the stairway and to my room. I stood in the door and stared at my bed. I was too dirty to lay in it just yet. I couldn't help but just admire it, with its frame, box spring, memory foam mattress, and full bedspread. The fluffy pillow seemed to taunt me. I hadn't had a pillow, any pillow, since I became a mage. Forcing myself away from the doorway of my bedroom, I went to the bathroom, stripped out of my clothes, placing them all in the trash can. I turned the water on and stepped under it. The hot water felt like heaven. All I'd had for the past year was a garden hose and a bucket. Ice-cold water wasn't very inviting. But now, the steam rose as the hot water massaged my back, my neck, my legs, everything. I shampooed, twice, I conditioned, and while it sat in my hair, I grabbed a fresh razor and went to work on my neglected legs and underarms. I had to change blades twice, thankful that my mother was in the habit of stocking up before she died. Everything in the house had been untouched. That little blessing was courtesy of strict rules the McGarry had about learners' property rights. Holly was banned from even entering the house. I was tempted to blockade myself inside, but I knew she'd call to me and I'd have no choice but to go to her. So I dressed in jeans, a tank, and a hoodie. I pulled on my favorite pair of Converse, and just for the sake of feeling human again, put on a little mascara and lip gloss, nearly destroying the mascara when the simple act of putting deodorant on nearly made me cry. It was nearly 5 when I pulled my gym bag out and stuffed a change of clothes inside, along with some toiletries. Just as I zipped the bag closed, I heard a knock at the door. Full of nerves, but full of energy too, I went to the door. To my surprise, the man was standing there instead of Holly.
Surprise,
he said with a shrug. Yeah, come on in. I stepped back. He took a few steps inside, looking around.
Wow, nice house. Tall ceilings, great woodwork. You have a real gem here, Ms.
Delacroix.
Ah, French. I like it. Ms. Delacroix. May I call you Maya?
I nodded.
Maya, I'm sure that you must be wondering why I asked to have you for a few days. You may have also recognized that I am, in fact, a vampire.
I hadn't known that. My stomach tightened at the possibilities of my demise.
Let me assure you, ma'am, that I have nothing nefarious planned. I would like you to accompany me to my estate. I have collected things over the years, and I wish for you to use your talents to help me sort through them. You will be well fed and well cared for during that time. I have a few friends, not vampires, in case you were wondering. They'll be in and out, but I assure you they're quite friendly.
I nodded. Okay then,
Here is a receipt
he said.
for the bank where I have deposited 1,000 into your account for your trouble.
1,000? And he wasn't using me as a call girl? I gulped and took the receipt. It had my name on it for a bank I didn't recognize. I stared hard at it.
What is it?
He asked. Where's this bank? His brow furrowed.
How long have you been a learner?
I swallowed. Please don't tell Holly. I didn't mean to offend you. He held up his hands.
You have my word. Now please, how long?
4 years, 2 weeks, and 3 days. I stared at my shoes. You ready? Mr. Holliday was quiet for a good long while. When I finally lifted my head to see if he was still there, he smiled.
Of course, after you.
Without explaining myself, I began shutting and locking the windows. When I was done, I finally stepped outside, and I locked the door behind him when he stepped out. I followed him to a shiny black car. We didn't speak as he drove. I took the opportunity to look at the surroundings, the street my house was on, everything. When we pulled onto a country road, I started feeling nervous.
What troubles you?
He asked. I cleared my throat. What makes you think anything is wrong?
My lady, I am a vampire. I can hear your heart tripping in your chest.
He smiled. Thankfully, there were no fangs.
We're nearly to my home. Are you sure you're well?
Not sure in the least, but I nodded anyway. The house was an enormous brick home with a black-topped drive. Huge trees with Spanish moss swaying dotted the lawn. After we parked, I followed him to the door. I expected darkness and caskets. I expected medieval paintings. What I did not expect was bright and airy. The floors were white granite tile, with an enormous stairway leading to the second level.
Come this way, please.
I followed him into what looked like a huge personal study. Bookshelves lined the walls and they were stuffed with books. He went to the fireplace along one wall and turned it on. It was obviously a gas fireplace for ambiance.
I'd like very much to get to know you a bit before we start working together.
He studied me for a long minute.
Have you ever tried whiskey?
No, I drank a lot of margaritas in college, though. He smirked.
I detect a strong person inside, someone with an iron will. A margarita simply won't do. Let's see if we can find you an adult beverage befitting someone with your tenacity. Come.
He flagged me over to a small bar that was set in one of the bookshelves. He opened a small fridge and pulled out a small bucket of ice. He dropped a few cubes in, then poured some liquid out of a decanter.
Try this.
I sniffed, then sipped. Oh, yuck. He laughed.
Yes, the juniper berry isn't for everyone. Gin is out.
With a fresh glass, he plunked a few more cubes of ice and poured clear liquid inside. Vodka. After one sip, I shook my head. Not as bad, but tastes like poor decisions. He laughed again.
I'm hoping I was right. Now this is not top-shelf whiskey. One of my acquaintances favors it. It's Jameson. Try this.
The drink was cool, but warmed me on its way down. It had oaky and buttery flavors to it. Honey, spice, buttery. It's nice. He nodded.
You, my dear, are a Jameson girl. I knew it.
He poured more into the glass and put the stopper back in the bottle. Then he poured himself a glass of the gin, and we sat on the couch.
The bank is the only bank breed in this area use. We don't use cash. Everything works on credits. When you need cash to travel to human districts, you can pull it out of the bank. Your ID is used to purchase everything here. It's all taken care of at the bank, which is about 3 blocks away from Miss Haven's shop.
That was good to know. Holly hadn't told me anything.
Now, I would like to know how your lessons with Miss Havens are going.
Lessons? His jaw clenched.
Training.
I shook my head.
How does your day start then?
With a sip of whiskey in my mouth, I shook my head.
You can't tell me?
I shook my head again.
There's a spell on you.
Yes, I said. If I try to say anything I'm not supposed to, I literally can't speak. I move my lips, but nothing comes out. He stood and walked over to his desk.
So, you've tried to tell someone your situation before?
Yes. I wanted to cry. Instead, I drank.
If I should ask you if she abuses you, you couldn't answer.
I shook my head. He nodded.
Good, good. She thinks she's smart. I see. Well, I'm older. Let's see if we can't play a game then. A wide smile spread across his lips. Let's say I have a little puppy. It's very cute and well-behaved, but it's still a puppy. It might pee on the floor or chew your favorite shoes. The puppy needs constant attention, fed frequently, bathed and the like. But I have to go out of town. Should I leave the puppy with Holly?
Gazing at him, I opened my mouth, hoping like hell I could speak. I don't think that would be wise. Happy that actual words came out, I got up from the couch and started pacing and drinking. May I have more? I asked when my glass was empty.
You may have all you want.
He waved his hand at the decanter.
Now, should I be foolish and leave that puppy with Holly? How would the puppy's day start?
With the glass so full it nearly spilled, I slowly walked to the couch and sat. I sipped off the top, enjoying the burn in my throat. First, she'd probably... The words quit coming out. However, I could see how this was working. I'd say the puppy might get kicked. Then nearly all of the energy would be drained out of the puppy because, we wouldn't want the puppy getting too rambunctious. The glass in Mr. Holliday's hand erupted. He'd squeezed it so hard, it shattered.
Apologies,
he said as he pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his hand. Your glass, your house. Break all you want. I smiled. He grabbed a broom from a closet in the corner, swept up the glass and discarded it before getting himself another drink.
Why don't you describe the puppy's bath time while I pour another drink?
I felt the hot tears forming and fought them back. It would be cold water from a hose and only a dirty rag to dry off with. He huffed, placed the glass on the desk and wiped his hands.
I shouldn't hold that, should I?
I couldn't help it. I laughed.
Do you know who I am?
With a shrug, I said, Mr. Holliday? He nodded.
My friends call me Doc.
You're shitting me. You're not saying you are that Doc Holliday?
In the
Chapter 4. We spent nearly an hour going over Holly's horrendous treatment before Doc led me to his basement, which didn't look much different than the majesty upstairs. I was in awe. He unlocked a large wooden door to display his cache of goods.
I'm going to go grab some crates. Anything that you deem valuable will go in a crate. Anything that isn't of magical significance will get put against the wall to be boxed up later. Does that work?
Teasing him, I said, It's your rodeo. The booze was kicking in. I was getting giddy. His lips twitched.
Maya, you are one colorful lady.
With a shrug, I started sorting through items. Most of what he had did give me some sort of vibration. Only a few items were duds. I came to a painting and nearly fainted. The woman stood tall, wearing battle armor. Her long, dark hair was nearly black, and I'd recognize those caramel eyes anywhere. I fell to my knees, never taking my eyes off of her. At the bottom of the painting was a metal plate that read, Melissa the Great.
Well, I have never seen such a reaction to that particular wizard,
Doc said. That, I said, pointing to the woman, is my best friend, Missy.
Impossible. Melissa the Great perished a few centuries ago. She was beheaded by the church.
I smiled through the tears. When we go, well, if we go back to my house, I can show you her photo. You're not going to believe it. Wait, you said wizard. Aren't wizards all men? Doc laughed.
No. Wizards, at least back then, were women also. They were then called witches, which are not anything like present-day witches. Due to the confusion, we went back to calling them what they were. Melissa was a great wizard who led many armies into battle. She would cast confusion spells, giving her army an advantage. It wasn't until she came up against a wizard moonlighting as an archdiocese that she was defeated. The church took her head for witchcraft. It was awful. That was about the time we started retreating from the human world.
I missed her so much. I would give anything to wrap my arms around her again, to watch a movie, go shopping, anything normal. I wanted to call her and hear her voice.
There's nothing magical about that painting. You can have it if you'd like.
His voice was soft. Shaking my head, I stood. I'm sorry. I just miss my old life and her, specifically. He nodded.
That gets easier over time. But look, it's getting late. I'm going to take you home for the night.
Home? With a smile, he held the door open.
Yes, I think the puppy needs a soft, warm bed tonight.
Wiping my eyes on my sleeves, I followed him out. He locked the door to his storage room. When we reached the top of the stairs, 3 women stood shoulder to shoulder. I froze.
Veronica, Macy, and Sally, this is my friend Maya.
One by one, they shook my hand, and I did the best I could not to look terrified. Holly had secluded me since she gave me my spark. I had met very few other supernatural or breed, as our kind were called. Doc stepped behind Veronica, who had long, red, curly hair.
Veronica is a mage. She is going to show you a few things tonight.
He stepped to his right.
Macy is a shifter. She is going to talk to you about breed and go over some common etiquette so that you don't get your ass handed to you by a she-wolf for stepping out of line.
Macy had bright green eyes and shoulder-length black hair pulled into a ponytail. He stepped to his right once more.
Sally is a fellow vampire. She is also a fabulous hairdresser who is going to give you a cut and style. All 3 of my friends are going to stay with you tonight for comfort, company, and most of all, protection.
Sally looked like a volleyball player, blonde, bronze, hair in a bun. Protection? He smiled.
Miss Havens will eventually figure out that you leaving was not her idea. She will call out to you. Veronica and Sally are going to make absolutely certain that you get to sleep in your own bed tonight.
I nodded. Sounds good. I don't care if you invite all of the people, as long as I sleep in my own bed. Doc walked us to a SUV that was waiting outside. We all climbed in, and he stayed behind. Sally pulled out of the drive like a madwoman. Gosh, I feel like someone important, I chuckled.
You are,
Macy said.
You're a goddamned mage.
Sally looked at me in the rear view.
Say it. Say, I'm a goddamned mage.
I chuckled. I'm a goddamned mage.
Louder.
Sally yelled. I'm a goddamned mage, I yelled. Veronica laughed.
You're goddamned right you are.
Veronica, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, turned to look at me.
We aren't going to talk about anything important until we're inside your house and I put a ward up.
A ward? Sally's hand flew up.
Unbelievable. She doesn't know basic protection spells. Holly needs her ass kicked.
I could not help it. I squirmed, wondering if Holly had some magical way of hearing my conversations. Macy patted my thigh.
Don't worry, hun. We got you. What do you like to eat? Pizza? Chinese?
Oh my God, I haven't had pizza in forever. My mouth watered just thinking about it. Macy grinned. Veronica lifted the center console and pulled out a phone and began dialing. A phone? In a car? What in the world? Macy was still grinning.
Car phone. Cool, right? There's an antenna on the roof that connects to the phone lines. It's super expensive, but so convenient.
I've never seen one, I admitted.
20 minutes till the pizza arrives.
Veronica announced.
I got 3 different kinds, so I hope you like one of them.
I did not give a damn if it had pineapple and fish on it. The ooey gooey cheese, the sauce, the crust. Just the thought of it made my stomach ache and my mouth water for a bite. How could I go back to the basement after this? Chapter 5. Sausage, cheese, and extra cheese. I was in love with these girls. Sally made a beer run which ended up being 3 boxes of liquor, mixers, and fruit. We ate, we drank, and now I sat on the floor, across from Veronica, who had tied her hair back.
So you are, for all intents and purposes, an energy being. Mages use the energy around them. We use elements like the cotton in your shirt, the life in the grass, everything, to conduct our magic. You channel it or lead it as a conductor leads an orchestra. Your battery is here,
She said, resting her palm just below her sternum.
The more you use your magic, the more familiar you'll get with it, and the more smoothly it will run.
If it's in my gut, how can someone pull it out of your hands? She nodded.
Your hands are how you channel your magic. Think of it like a plug-in. Your hands are the plugs. Energy in, energy out. Now, hold your hands out, palms up like this.
Veronica posed like she was holding a bowl of water. I did the same.
Now feel that thing inside and try to push it toward your hands.
I did as she said and searched inside. I could feel it. It moved up my chest and into my arms. It slowly traveled down my arms until it reached my hands.
Now hold your hands apart a bit.
I did, and a small ball of blue light formed that was about the size of a walnut. A squeal of delight erupted from my mouth that I hadn't expected. She smiled.
Good. Now practice that for a bit.
After about 5 minutes, I had a soccer ball-sized energy ball. The excitement built until I felt I would burst.
Now, this is your energy. You don't want to get rid of it unless you have to. So pull it back in. Push your hands together and imagine your arms sucking the energy back through to your core.
After a few minutes of trying, I managed to pull it back in.
Good.
She grinned.
That's a weapon. If someone needs it, you throw it to them like a grenade. No, more like a baseball. That's it. Whip it at them like you would if you were trying to hit them with a baseball.
I had one hell of a buzz, not just from all the alcohol, but from learning my craft. I was, however, exhausted. How did you make the ward thing? I asked as I stood.
You'll learn that tomorrow. It's sort of the same premise though you use outside energy to construct it.
She wrapped her arms around me, shocking me a bit. I wasn't expecting it. Then she took her hands in mine.
I want you to experience something else.
I looked down as she grabbed my hands and locked her fingers in mine.
This is what it's like to receive energy instead of it being robbed from you.
Her light glowed purple, and it seeped into my hands, giving me the most euphoric feeling had ever felt. It started off light and tingly, then grew warm, like a cup of hot cocoa wrapped in a hug. She leaned in, whispering a little.
It's a little intimate, like a kiss, so please don't misunderstand me. You're cute and all, but
She smiled wide.
not my type.
I nodded, smiling back. Thank you. Her hand tightened around mine.
No one should ever take your light. Ever. It's the worst crime among mages. Stealing light is a violation like being violated against your will. It's disgusting. What she is doing is wrong. So wrong.
Sally was standing watch at the window, and I had no idea where Macy was. Not caring if she were digging through my underwear drawer, I climbed the stairs to my room. I pulled my pants and socks off and climbed in the covers. Compared to the old mattress on the floor, it felt like a cloud. For a hot minute, I felt like everything would be all right. I was safe. I was full, in every sense of the word. I could sleep. The next day, as Sally was driving us back to Doc's house, I got up the nerve to ask her something. So, vampires bursting into flames in the sun? That was all fiction? She giggled.
Yep. The older we get, the more it hurts our eyes, but that's all. Sunglasses are a godsend.
She shrugged.
I still lay out, I still tan, it's nice. Hellfire is about the only thing that we're truly terrified of. Well, that and necromancers.
When we entered Doc's house, he greeted us and led us to the dining room where a large breakfast waited. Sally ate. Doc did not. I did not hold back, devouring bacon, eggs, pancakes, and grits. Having no idea when I would eat like this again, I ate until I felt like I'd purge. Then, we went through the final items in storage, which only took a few hours. My nerves were frayed as I thought about going back to Holly. Maybe Veronica could tell me how to break our ties.
You're going to spend some time training. I'll be back in a few hours.
Doc turned and quickly walked away. He had barely said 2 words to me the entire time. It was weird, and I began to worry. But then, my training had started. Macy filled me in on etiquette with shifters. Veronica showed me how to use the sun to recharge my core and heal from wounds.
Remember, you're an energy being. Hold your hand into the light and soak in the warmth. It will heal you immediately. But the longer it takes you to get to the light, the more likely you will scar. Understand?
I nodded.
Only absorb tiny amounts. You'll pull it in like you're pulling your own energy back in, but slowly. Too much sun energy absorbed and you can fry your brain.
I gulped. Noted. Sally told me a bit more about vampires, and that's when Doc came in through the front door, looking frustrated. He stood looking at the 4 of us.
It seems that Miss Havens filed a complaint.
Is that going to affect...
Macy wasn't allowed to finish that sentence, as Doc held up his hand and shook his head.
No, but she claims that Maya has been taken against her will. She tried calling out to you, but Veronica's ward shielded you. Thank you, Miss Veronica, for an excellent ward, by the way.
He took a deep breath and smiled.
So, with that being said, I just spent the better part of the morning with the authority filing my own report.
He cracked his neck.
Miss Havens' appetites are going to get her into a lot of hot water.
Blinking rapidly to fight back tears, I cleared my head and nodded. Okay, well, what should I do? His gaze fell to the floor.
I'm to take you back home where Holly can retrieve you.
What? My heart dropped into my shoes. Now? Still unable to make eye contact, he nodded.
Veronica, we'll talk you through breaking the bond on the way. It won't be easy. You may not be able to do it alone, but it's all I can lawfully do at the moment.
Trying to show I understood, I gave a small nod. Okay, then. Veronica grabbed my hand and pulled me to face her.
I'm going to give you all the energy I can before I leave your side. I want you juiced up for what you're about to do, okay?
I nodded and sniffed. Starvation, abuse, torment. That had been my life for over 4 years now. I wasn't sure how much more I could take. Chapter 6. Veronica spoke fast as Doc drove.
A bond between creator and learner is something very sacred and strong. It's not easily broken. Usually, a broken bond is a mutually agreed upon situation where neither party is happy. A forced separation is exceptionally difficult. There are 2 ways you can do this.
Just tell me what to do. I was shaking. It didn't take long to get to my place, and I was worried we'd run out of time. She gave a firm nod and grabbed me by the forearms, as if to lock us together.
You can either make her hate you so bad she wants to get rid of you, or you can try to break it yourself.
I gulped. How?
You will have to find that spot inside you where the bond is. It's where she reaches when she calls you to come to her. You have to sever it with your power. Now I know that sounds crazy since you're just learning how to use your magic, but it really is mind over matter. Picture it as a string, and you cut it, burn it, whatever.
Holly would not let me leave her side again for quite a while. She just wouldn't. I knew that this stunt with Doc was going to get me in a lot of trouble. I didn't care. It was worth it. But now I had to deal with it. Then an idea hit. Mr. Holliday? He looked at me in the rear view.
Please, Doc is fine.
Can't you just convince her to cut ties the way you convinced her to let me come work for you? He shook his head.
I could be beheaded for severing the tie that way. Enchanting someone, or glamoring as the young people call it these days, isn't difficult for even an inexperienced vampire. But she'll already know I've been messing in her head, thin as it is. She'll likely have her guard up. Either way, even if I could physically do it, and I'm sure I could, the price...
I would never, ever ask you to lay your life down for me. I swallowed hard. But thank you. He nodded. There was pain in those eyes, and shame. When we reached my house, Doc rushed us inside.
Veronica, take her out the back door and start training her how to make a ward. Quick!
We ran through the house, Veronica dragging me by the wrist, until we reached the back door. I pulled it open and stepped on the back porch. She sighed.
Okay then, close your eyes for a moment and find your center.
I closed my eyes, but I had no idea what she was talking about.
Find your core of power.
She whispered. That I could find. I reached in and visually held onto it.
Now open your eyes.
I did.
That old willow had been around hundreds of years. There are tons of life in that tree, carbon, bugs, bacteria, fungus. Pull from that life. Don't try to kill it. Just borrow some energy, elements. Ask Mother Nature for help to protect your home.
I stared at the tree until I saw something shimmering. Help me, please. Help me protect this place.
Shh! In your mind, from your soul.
She whispered.
Pull that energy to you with your hands and drape it over the house.
I wasn't sure if I could, but I felt something, like fabric, thin and fragile fabric. I held on to it and pulled. I plead with the tree, the earth, the heavens for protection. Then I draped it, like she'd instructed. Then something odd happened. For a brief moment, I could see a blue shimmer around my house.
Well done! Hot damn, you're a natural. It took me weeks to figure that out.
I gasped.
But you're motivated. That helps.
She patted my back, then tilted her ear up.
Just in time. Stay inside the ward. That means inside the house. Do not cross the threshold. Got it?
I nodded and followed her inside. It was then I could hear Doc.
You filed a complaint, Holly. I paid you for her time and skill. You filed a false report. You do know what this means?
Doc's voice was level and calm. Holly, on the other hand, was screaming.
I called to her last night. I called and nothing. How did I know you hadn't used her for something nefarious? Dinner, perhaps?
A sound like a large dog growl rumbled, and that's when I noticed the enormous wolf standing next to Doc.
I find it very interesting that you would accuse me of using her as a snack. From what I can tell, you've done a fair amount of snacking yourself.
They were standing in the yard, just past the sidewalk leading to the door, which was only about 5 feet long.
Maya!
Holly screeched.
Come here!
I stepped toward the door, though I tried not to. Then, as if a rubber band was pulling, it relaxed and I stepped back. Was that the ward?
Stealing her light is a crime. I've reported you to the Majeri and her living conditions. Really, Holly?
Veronica seethed.
How dare you violate your learner?
I gulped as Holly's face burned.
She's mine.
Ah,
Doc said as he circled her.
that would be the problem. Maya is a being all unto herself. She is owned by no one. You are to care for her and train her. Funny how after all of this time she didn't even know how to do the most basic of protection spells. What have you been doing with her all of this time?
Holly crossed her arms over her chest.
It's not my fault she is too stupid to learn.
Veronica strode out the door, walked up to Holly and put her finger in her face.
That ward is hers. She learned how to do it in 5 minutes. Perhaps it's not the student but the teacher who is consuming all of her light and failing to teach her anything.
A loud slap startled me. Veronica held her cheek where Holly slapped her. Before anyone could react, Veronica pulled her fist back and hit my creator so hard in the nose, blood erupted from her face, then blasted her with an energy ball hard enough to knock her back 10 feet. Holly landed with a thud. Doc put his hands on Veronica's arms.
That's quite enough.
The wolf walked over to Holly, lifted her leg and let loose a solid blast, dousing the woman in urine. I covered my mouth in shock and awe. Holly sat up, wiped her nose, and gathered her own energy ball.
Throw that and I'll rip your throat out,
Doc growled.
Enough of this. Go home, Holly.
She picked herself up, holding her arms out.
She urinated on me, you disgusting beast.
She stomped off, climbed in her car, and peeled off. My 3 friends turned to look at me.
She'll be back, but you have a little more time to enjoy your home. It'll take the McGarry some time to investigate. I don't know what they will do, but I do wish you the best of luck.
Doc pulled out a business card.
You'll have to step past the ward to grab it.
When I crossed the threshold of my home, I felt a wave pour over me, like a static shock, but without the kick. I took his card and thanked him.
Try to stay in touch, Ms. Delacroix.
He smiled, and I watched the 3 of them as they climbed in Doc's SUV and drove off. I stepped back into my house, shut and locked the door. I didn't know how long I had, and I didn't care. For now, I was in the sanctity of my own home. I turned and looked around at my house. It was exactly the way I had left it. Boxes were stacked in the living room with my mother's old antiques. I shuffled to the kitchen, found a sealed can of coffee, and brewed a pot. There was canned milk and sugar, and that was good enough. I poured a cup of coffee and braved cleaning out the fridge. It didn't take long as I wasn't much of a cook, and my mother had been gone long enough that there were no leftovers. After washing my hands, I grabbed a piece of cold pizza, plopped it on a plate, and stuck it in the oven. If I had to go back to Holly, I wasn't going hungry. This time, I would put up a fight. Chapter 7. If I was going to sever the bond, I was going to have to test the waters. To be sure I had enough strength, I ate all the leftover pizza. While coffee and pizza weren't a match made in heaven, and canned milk wasn't the ideal coffee creamer, I made the best of it. Once finished, I cleaned up and headed to the living room. On the mantel was a photo of Missy and me. I was a tall girl at 5'11", but Missy made me look short. She was every bit of 6'1" and strong like a bull. She worked construction jobs during the summers off college. Missy was strong. Missy was fierce. I was going to have to channel my best friend's energy. I missed her and wished I could call her. The rules, however, were very clear. Cutting ties with the human world was not negotiable. I'd wanted her to get on with her own life, to stop looking out for me. She'd been there for me when my mother died, and that was great. But she didn't know how to take care of herself and not worry about me. Then she landed her dream job an hour away. I assured her I would be fine and encouraged her to go. So, she did. And I left the human world for good. That feeling of the rubber band pulling and releasing started up. I willingly walked to the door, opened it, and found Holly standing in the yard. She'd healed from the broken nose and cleaned up.
Look, Maya, I know you're angry with me.
Angry? Angry. Are you fucking kidding me, bitch? Her eyes widened at me.
Language!
Fuck you. You have abused me, starved me, treated me like, I don't know what, less than human, that's for sure. You drain me every day to where I can hardly walk. What kind of person does that?
I was trying to protect you.
She whined. Oh, bullshit! Bullshit! I screamed.
Maya, come here.
She said in a low voice. I felt that rubber band pull and forced myself to take a step further inside. Go to hell, Holly. I'm staying here. I'm going to live here. I'm going to sleep in my bed, not on the floor in your basement. Do you hear me?
Come to me. Now!
She barked. The rubber band that held us together was pulling so hard, it felt like I would break. I lifted my foot and kicked the door shut, then put my back to it. I closed my eyes and tried to envision the band. I tried to envision taking a knife and slashing through it. Still, it pulled. I screamed out in pain, then gritted my teeth and tried again. Still, she pulled at me and pulled. My guts felt like they were being ripped from my insides now. I'd rather die here, leaning against my door, than to suffer that woman one more day.
Maya!
Holly screamed.
Maya, open the door. Let's talk.
Get off my lawn! Go away! The rubber band eased a bit.
Maya, you cannot sever this bond. I can pull every day, but it doesn't have to be this way.
I held my stomach, praying my guts wouldn't actually spill out. You did this!
I know. But you can't leave until you can pass the basic tests. You have to come back.
Leaning my head against the door, I took a deep, cleansing breath. I will not go back. Not like that. You've taught me nothing.
Maya, this is the first time I've been a creator.
I knew I couldn't win yet. I stood, pulled my shoulders back, lifted my chin, and jerked the door open. I'd rather die in here of starvation than be your pet. I will sleep in my own home. I will come to you in the morning and work for you, and at night I will go back home. You will never drain me again. If you do, so help me God, I will find someone to kill you for me. Understood? She swallowed hard. It must have been something in my face, maybe my determination.
I can agree to that.
There was not a shred of truth in her eyes. But this would buy me some time to think. Fine, I will meet you at the shop at 7.
Maya.
She said, holding her hand up. I narrowed my eyes. Holly, you'd better hope and pray that one day when this bond is released, that I do not kill you myself. I'd start working on how you're going to convince me not to slit your throat. I don't care what happens to me anymore. My life as I knew it is over. If the Majeri kills me because I took your head, well, the world will be a better place. Understand now? My hands were shaking, and my knees felt like they would buckle. She nodded.
If you're not at the shop by 7, I will come looking for you.
Go! I yelled. I could see her chin knot as she clenched her jaw. She turned and waddled to her car. I slammed the door and crumpled to the floor, sobbing. The tears weren't out of pain. The tears weren't out of frustration or sorrow. I just won my first battle. Just one. Me, alone. Maya Delacroix had just fought and won my first battle of wits with my creator. After a few minutes, I peeled myself off the floor, bolted the door shut, and climbed the stairs on my hands and knees. I stripped, climbed into the tub, and ran it full of hot water. I soaked. I cried. But most of all, I sighed in relief. A hot bath was something I'd dreamed of for months. The shower was just magical, but this? I wasn't rushed. I could just relax and give myself a minute. A minute turned to an hour. The water grew cold. It was time to gather myself together. It was time to figure this shit out. Holly and I were not going to be connected much longer. Chapter 8. I had been so exhausted from everything that day, I had slept for nearly 10 hours. Still, I was up early. I managed to stuff myself with coffee, a can of beans, heated up with a bit of tomato sauce. Gross, but hey, it was food. I ate it all, drank as much coffee and I could handle, then cleaned up my mess. I went to the garage, pleasantly surprised to find my car still inside. I wasn't sure it would have been brought with the house. Either way, I opened the door, stuck my key in the ignition, and turned. Nothing. 3 years of inactivity had drained the battery. This was no problem. With no man in the house, my mother and I had been very self-sufficient. I went to the storage shelves along the wall and grabbed the jump box. It was a little box you plugged in, hooked to your battery, and it started your car. Then, hopefully, the alternator would charge the battery fully by the time you stopped. If not, the battery would die once more and would need replacing. Minor home and auto repairs were one of the first things I had to learn. Unfortunately, Mom was so worried about that stuff, she forgot that I barely knew how to cook. One step at a time, one foot in front of the other, that's how I would manage it. No matter what Holly did, she could not break me again. I wasn't afraid of her. I was afraid of becoming who I was, in that basement, weak, sad, starving, and vulnerable. There was no way I was letting her do that to me again. I never expected it. For some stupid reason, I had trusted her. I had trusted that she had my best interests at heart. Then I saw the mattress, and she did what she did. Arriving at Holly's store early was the plan. I was going to fake this shit until I made it. I parked the car, praying the alternator had charged the battery. I leaned my back against the stone facade and propped my foot against it, trying to look as bored and casual as possible. When Holly turned the corner and pulled in behind me, my heart tripped a little. I remained as relaxed as I could as she approached.
Young lady, get your foot off my building.
Old witch, be happy I even showed up to this shithole. She glared at me. Referring to a mage as a witch was a slap in the face at best. She wanted to retort but decided against it. When I shoved off the building to stand face to face with her, I stepped very close, making sure she felt our size difference. I wanted her to see and feel that I was physically larger and stronger, not to mention younger. As she lifted her chin more to look up at me, she finally stepped back. She unlocked the shop and we went inside.
Go on upstairs and get to work.
Hold up! She turned to face, eyes burning with anger.
You do not order me around.
Fine. I'll just take matters into my own hands then. I shrugged and started for the stairs.
What does that mean?
She asked. When I failed to answer, she yelled the question again. I slowly turned. You should be more open to discussion. Now you'll have to learn the hard way. There were no questions. I was just screwing with her. I left her marinate in her anger as I trudged up the stairs. I sorted through boxes, or rather, pretended to sort through them as I felt for objects of importance. Not having any idea how I would move forward to sever this bond, I knew the only thing I could do was buy myself some time to come up with a plan. Holly wouldn't let me go anytime soon, but then again, she might. Acquiring artifacts was what she wanted me for to begin with, but why was that? Why couldn't she do it herself? I stopped sorting for a moment. Reaching inside for my light, I wanted to see if I could hold it in one hand instead of two. I pulled the smallest amount I could manage and let it radiate to my palm. It was exhilarating. I quickly pulled it back in and stared at my hand in awe.
Someone taught you something.
Holly's voice was low and somewhat pained. Lifting my chin, I turned to face her. Someone had to. You were failing miserably at even trying. As a matter of fact, I'm wondering now why instead of giving me any lessons, you only drained my powers. The only time you didn't drain me was when you sent me hunting. I stepped toward her. Tell me, Creator, why you could not hunt down these artifacts on your own. Why did you need me? She smiled, ran her finger along a chest, and inspected the tips of her fingers for dust.
Well, I needed a relic, of course.
What did that mean? I wasn't going to ask. I wasn't going to let her know she had anything on me. Figures. You have all of this shit up here collecting dust. You don't even know what you have or what you need. She nodded.
But I have you.
Her sickly red lips split into a smile.
I have you for eternity now.
I swallowed hard as I turned my back on her. My heart hammered in my chest. What do you want? I mean, what do you really want? Having control over me can't be your life's goal.
My dear.
I could hear the boards squeaking as she walked up behind me. She placed her palm on my forearm. I jerked it back, not wanting her to touch me at all. I turned and drove my fist as hard as I could into her mouth. When she stumbled back, I pulled hard at my light and threw it at her, hitting her in the chest. She flew back, glass and porcelain shattering everywhere.
My things!
She screamed. Oh, your things! Your things! I drew another ball of energy and threw it into a pile of crates, sending them toppling. Holly gathered her energy in her hand quickly. It glowed an evil red hue. She lobbed it at me like a softball. I do not know what came over me, but I held my hand up, capturing it.
Impossible!
She gasped. I pulled her light into my hand. Bile rose in my throat, but I choked it down. Her magic tasted foul, like spoiled meat. You will never touch me again, I screamed. Never! I lobbed magic at an armoire full of crystal, destroying it. I will ruin your things, ruin you. Do you understand? She stood, holding her hands in the air, surrendering.
Okay, Maya. Okay. The Majeri is already crawling up my backside. I won't be taking any more of your light.
I heaved, the adrenaline and anger coursing through my veins, making it hard to breathe. I was done screaming. I tilted my head down and my eyes up, looking as menacing as I could.
You need to leave for the day, Maya. You need to go home and cool down. Your light is throbbing inside of you. You need to get hold of yourself. Go on. I'll clean up.
Her voice trembled and her hands shook. I'd succeeded in intimidating her, and she was letting me go for the day. Perhaps this would be easier than I had feared. I stormed down the stairs and out of the shop. I climbed in my car and turned the key. My chest tightened. The damned alternator hadn't charged the battery. All I got was a click, so I popped the hood. Veronica said I was a being of light and energy. The car needed energy. I put one finger on each of the terminals and prayed I wasn't about to kill myself. I pulled at the power inside and forced it into the battery. I counted to 10, broke the connection, then tried starting the car again. It fired. I jumped out of the car, slammed the hood shut, climbed in, and peeled off. The problem was that I had no idea where I was going. I barely knew this town, but I remembered that the bank was close to Holly's store. Went around the corner and found the bank. I had no ID, but I had to try. Inside the building looked like any other bank, except the man behind the counter was very short with bumpy skin and pointed ears. I went to the counter. Hi, my name is Maya Delacroix. I understand there's an account here in my name? The troll narrowed his eyes at me.
You knew?
I nodded. I actually do not know how any of this works. My creator, she hasn't told me anything. The man shouted something in a language I did not understand. A very tall man with long silken hair came from around the corner. He wore a blue button-down shirt and a black vest. His eyes were the most piercing blue I had ever seen. The troll spoke to the man in the odd language again. The only thing I understood was my own name.
"Ah,"
said the tall man.
"Please, Ms. Delacroix, follow me."
My palms were sweaty. I rubbed them on my thighs as I followed the man down a short hall to an office piled high with boxes and papers.
"Have a seat.
He said, motioning to the single wooden chair across from his desk.
Your creator is not the only one to fail in teaching the economics of this world. That is where the bank succeeds in filling the gap. She did transfer your assets for you."
He pulled a sheet of paper out of a brown folder and pushed it across his desk.
"This is the balance."
It was more than I recalled having from the settlement. Not a lot more, but about 10,000 more.
"You've accrued some interest since the account was started."
Relief, sweet relief. I had money.
"We work in this town much like credit accounts."
He shoved a brown paper envelope toward me. I opened it and dumped the contents out. Inside was my breed ID. I nearly cried. I did not cry, just wanted to.
"Since you are new, when you enter a store and go to pay for goods, you'll need to show your ID. They'll bill your account. We send you papers to sign to pay those bills. Money is never transferred without your approval. This keeps everyone honest. If you don't pay the grocer, they won't sell you more groceries and you starve. If you don't pay your light bill, they will turn the lights off and won't turn them back on without payment in full, and so on. If there's a charge that's fraudulent, you bring that to the bank's attention and they settle the matter. That's all there is to it. Eventually, once business owners know who you are, you won't need to show your ID. There is an ATM card you can take with you if you need to go to the human district. We prefer you use cash, however. Our system is set up to protect us from the human government. Debit and credit are traceable. Cash is not."
I nodded. While it was a lot to take in, it was pretty straightforward.
"Anyone can put money into an account, but you are the only person to take it out. Unless you pass, then your personal representative makes sure your money goes where you wish."
What if I don't have a personal representative? I asked.
"Then, since you are a mage, it would go straight to the Majeri's account."
Damn. I looked at him and smiled. Is there anything else?
"Unlike human banks, we are open all hours, day and night. We are closed on January 1st, October 31st, December 25th, and December 31st. That's it."
So, I can go get groceries right now with this? I held up my ID.
"Yes, Ms. Delacroix."
I chewed my lip. The lights and heat are already on in my home. He smiled.
"That account has been opened for you. Now that you've made it to the bank, you'll start receiving the bill. If the house has sat vacant, the bill won't be too large, and there's ample funds to cover it. The utility company is a bit more understanding than sole proprietors. It's run by vampires, and they understand rearing one of their own takes some time."
I couldn't have been more relieved than I felt at that moment. Thank you, sir. Thank you. He stood and tucked his fingers inside his vest.
"The pleasure is mine, Ms. Delacroix. Welcome to Atlantis."
Sure that I'd heard him wrong, I smiled and left without saying another word. The moment I was outside, I stopped the first woman I saw and asked for directions to the closest grocery store. It was time to start living again. Chapter 9. When the doors to the grocery store slid open, I swallowed hard to choke back the sob of relief gathered in my throat. No one cried at the grocery store. It was absurd. There wasn't much that I knew how to cook, but that wasn't a problem. I could read package directions, and I could make a salad. In short order, I'd filled my cart with anything and everything I could use to keep myself fed. Then there was the coffee aisle. I would not run out of coffee. I grabbed 5 large cans of dark roast and some powdered creamer for emergencies. Then I went to the dairy aisle and grabbed some liquid creamer. I was all set with a cart so full I could hardly push it. When I got home, it took almost an hour to put everything away. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat at the table, trying to figure out what to do next. Holly was able to keep me as a pet because no one was looking for me. No one had known me. I had to change that. This brought me back to my best friend. She'd been fearless, except for one tiny detail. She was scared of snakes, but had a love of kayaking. If I pointed out a snake hole or see an actual snake, she'd correct me. They're called water bunnies. As if calling them bunnies made them less terrifying. Obviously, if I were going to make some friends, they would need a sense of humor. They'd also have to forgive my lack of knowledge of this world. I knew, going in, that I was like a toddler seeing a whole new world. I knew less than nothing. That was okay. I'd learn. I changed into jeans, boots, and a black tee. After putting on a little eyeliner and brushing my hair, I headed out to check out my new town. I headed back toward Holly's shop because I knew where that was and wanted a point of reference. Driving past, I noticed she'd closed the shop early and smiled. She was probably still cleaning up the mess I'd made. Good. Driving slowly so I could take note of the shops around, I spotted a bar and parked close by. When I crossed the street to go inside, I paused looking around and noticed something peculiar. There were no dogs. In my human life, it was common to see people walking dogs in the afternoon. Here, not one dog on a leash was to be spotted. While it was odd, it was also a small thing, so I continued across the brick road and opened the door to the bar, stepping inside. The bar was softly lit with sconces along the walls, which had deep, dark wooden wainscoting a third of the way up. The bar ran the length of the tavern, so I bellied up and smiled at the bartender. She glanced at me and smiled.
"You're new,"
she said with a smile. "Yep." What else could I say? She nodded.
"What'll it be?"
"Do you have any Jameson?" The woman had dark hair braided down the back. She was slightly shorter than me, with big green eyes that disappeared as her cheeks rose to squeeze them as she smiled at me.
"Yes, ma'am."
I gave her a nod and slid my ID across the counter. She snagged it up, scanned it in, and handed it back.
"Need on or the rocks?"
"Rocks, please." The bar was fairly empty, with only a few tables containing pairs of people talking.
"What brings you in?"
she asked as she slid the drink to me. With a sheepish smile, I shrugged. "I was just trying to get out and meet people." Her smile eased a bit as her brows drew in.
"This isn't really the place for that. Do you know your way around Atlantis yet?"
Did these people really call this town Atlantis? How tacky. "Not very well." She grabbed a napkin and drew a rough map.
"You want to go 4 blocks down this way. It's called Hijinks. They have good food and even better mixed drinks. Most of all, it's where people go when they want to socialize. This bar is more for people who want a quiet place for a drink and discussion."
I smiled wide and thanked her. "How do I tip, since this is all on account?" She shook her head.
"You poor thing. No one told you anything, did they?"
She sighed.
"When you get the bill to sign for the bank to pay, there's a line for gratuity. Just fill that in, and I'll get my tip."
"Well, it's going to be a great tip. Thank you for your help." I took a sip of the Jameson, then left the nearly full glass as I headed out the door. 4 blocks away was a short enough distance. I took the chance to walk and take note of the shops along the way. There had been bakeries, restaurants, bookshops, an apothecary, nearly anything I could want aside from clothes. When I reached Hijinks, I could hear the crowd from outside and took that as an excellent sign. I opened the door and was suddenly overwhelmed by the number of bodies. This was definitely the place to socialize. Several eyes were on me as I headed to the bar. 2 men were behind it, mixing cocktails and chatting with the crowd.
"Nice boots,"
a woman said as she stepped up next to me. I smiled at her. "Thanks."
"Hey, Mick,
she said as she threw her hand up. The bartender closest to us glanced over and acknowledged her. He wore a tight black shirt that hugged every bulge. The guy was ripped.
Be right there,
he said as he poured a cocktail into a martini glass.
As he walked up, she barked out,
A cat's meow. He nodded, grabbed a cocktail shaker, and began mixing. When I saw him crack open a can of tuna and pour the juice in, my stomach churned. What the hell kind of cocktail had tuna juice in it? He poured the white foaming concoction into a rocks glass and slid it to her. When she sipped it, I swear I heard her purr. Cat shifter?
What'll you have?
He asked. Jameson on the rocks. Save the tuna. Gross. He poured 3 fingers of whiskey in a glass, plopped a sphere of ice in the glass, and held onto it.
ID.
I happily handed it over and took my drink. He scanned the ID, then typed my name into a screen before handing it back.
Welcome to Hijinks, Maya.
Thanks, I said with a smile so wide, my cheeks felt as if they'd split.
Our menus are on the wall behind me. Should you want to try another drink or get a bite to eat, just holler.
He winked, then abruptly turned and took another order. I was not here to ogle the bartenders. I was here to mingle. Ogling the bartender would just be a delicious distraction. I spotted the woman with the tuna drink on the dance floor. She was rubbing up on another girl, running her forehead along the woman's shoulder.
Cats!
A guy next to me huffed. I turned to him. What? A glance at him gave me the chance for a quick assessment. He wasn't as ripped as the bartender, but he was close. He wore a black button-down with the sleeves rolled up and dark jeans.
Cats, they're always rubbing on you. They're weird that way.
He shook his head, then sipped at his beer. Yeah, I said, not knowing a thing about them. At least she's not hacking up a furball. He coughed and spluttered as he choked on his beer, laughing. I smiled, celebrating the tiny win. Then I felt something crawling around my shoulders, like threads of silk being draped over my soul. It quickly subsided and I shivered.
You okay?
He quirked a brow. I nodded, not sure what that sensation was.
How long have you been a mage?
Swallowing hard, not ready to answer questions, I replied, How did you know? He shook his head.
Your creator is pathetic if she didn't teach you to at least identify when another mage is feeling you out.
She is the most pathetic, actually. I rolled my eyes. He held out his hand.
Darius!
As I shook his hand, he winked.
I'm also a mage. That sensation a moment ago was me feeling around your magic to find out what breed you are.
Breed? With a roll of his eyes, he walked away. Well, shit. I felt a hand around my arm and turned to find a young woman tugging me.
Come here!
She was tiny, a little over 5 feet, with whitish blonde hair and a golden hue to her skin.
Come on!
Allowing her to pull me, I followed to the corner. Can I help you? She shook her head.
No, but I'm going to help you. You look lost, and you just chased away another mage, which never happens. So, I'm going to assume you're newly made.
Feeling the most embarrassed I'd ever felt, I tossed back the remainder of my drink, needing the liquid courage. Yes, I'm new. She nodded.
I heard part of your conversation. I'm not a mage. I'm Fae.
Fae? Her hand came up and she rubbed her forehead vigorously.
Fae? Fairies? Anyway, mages can feel around other people's magic to try and figure out what they are. Fae can do it too. I suppose wizards can, but they don't. Too arrogant, I suppose. Anyway, think about the word breed. It's like a variety or species of plant or animal. Shifters are a species, but among that species are a variety like cats, wolves, and so on. Since it can get complicated, we've narrowed it down over time to just say breed.
I nodded. Okay. How do I feel around magic? She squeezed her eyes shut. I'm sorry, Holly didn't teach me much. Her face turned red.
That woman is a menace. I had dealings with her one time. No more. Do not like her.
I squinted at her, wondering why she was beginning to lose complete sentences. Then she started what sounded like cursing in a language I didn't recognize.
My name is Key.
Key? Weird name, but okay. I'm Maya. She nodded.
If someone says something you don't understand, play it off. Don't show them how uneducated you are. They'll take advantage of that or get disgusted like that guy. Make note of what they're saying so you can figure it out later.
Okay. I looked around the bar again. There were so many people. I wondered how many different kinds of breed or whatever there were. When I turned back to Key, she was gone. Well, that was rude. Chapter 10. It was time to start over. Only a few people could have seen me make an ass out of myself. So I stepped up to the bar, ordered another drink. With a new drink in hand, I pulled my shoulders back, lifted my chin, and strutted to the pool tables. I watched, noticing there was nowhere to put coins in. With no physical money, I wasn't sure how this worked. In the human world, you put your quarters on the table to get in line for your turn. When a table was empty, I walked up to it and started setting the rack.
Looking for a game?
I looked up to see a tall man with dark, wavy hair and broad shoulders standing with a cue stick in his hand. My heart tripped a little. Sure. I've already racked 'em up for you.
Care to wager?
Great. I wasn't looking for a professional game. I was just trying to do something other than standing around looking awkward. Not really. If you don't just want to play for fun, then I'm not your girl. Shit, that didn't sound right. What had I just said? His bright green eyes danced as he smiled.
For fun, then.
He stepped forward, offering his hand.
I'm Victor.
Maya, I said as I shook his hand. Damn, his hand was warm. Maybe it was just me. I was feeling flush. But then again, this was the hottest guy I'd seen in a long time. Determined not to look like a total doofus, I walked over to the rack and chose a cue. When I turned back to the table, he was bent over it, ready to break. He looked up at me and grinned before the resounding crack of the cue ball hitting the rack snapped through the air. 2 balls fell. He shot a few more in until he finally missed. I sipped my drink, put it back on the table, then walked around the pool table, figuring out my first shot.
So,
Victor said after I took my first shot, sinking the ball.
You're not a shifter.
I grinned. What makes you say that? He tapped his nose.
You don't smell like a shifter.
I took another shot and, thank all that is holy, the ball went in. Really? What do I smell like? He glanced at the ceiling, then closed his eyes as he took a deep breath in.
Rain. You smell like rain.
Rain smells like fish to me. He burst out laughing.
You do not smell like fish. Let's see if I can narrow this down.
He stepped closer.
I detect fresh rose petals, wisteria and cyclamen, bergamot, and a bit of moss. Perhaps a bit of sandalwood.
I blinked.
What?
He said with a laugh. That's oddly specific. His grin widened.
And now I definitely know you're not a shifter. Our nose knows.
Fair point. It's your turn. Wow, he could smell all of that on me? Or maybe he was just full of shit. If it was the way he flirted, I had to give him points for originality. He took his turn, nearly clearing the table. I would not win the game. That was abundantly clear, but that wasn't my goal here. He was a shifter, but what kind? Was there a way I could tell? I didn't want to reach out with my magic and accidentally zap him, but asking was rude, so how would I find out? When he passed in front of me, I decided to try out my magic. I felt out, trying to nonchalantly move my hands. Victor jumped.
What the hell?
He started laughing.
Did you just pinch my ass?
Enough of this. Enough of pretending. I refused to be embarrassed. I marched up to him and crossed my arms over my chest. Look, I'm new. My creator, if a filthy piece of garbage that didn't teach me anything. I was trying to figure out what kind of shifter you are without asking, because for whatever stupid reason, that is rude. I mean, really? Why isn't that the same as asking someone where they're from? Anyway, if that turns you off or whatever, feel free to run off like the others. He froze momentarily, then slowly placed his pool stick on the table. Great, he was leaving. I was really sucking wind at making friends. Then, Victor held out his hands like we were introducing ourselves again. His lips slowly spread into a smile.
Hello, Maya the mage. My name is Victor. I am a dragon.
I stared at his hand for a second before I put my hand in his and shook it. Nice to meet you, Victor. Dragon, huh? That's kind of badass. He tilted his head.
Kind of?
I shrugged. I've never seen a dragon, so I cannot say. His head rocked back and forth.
This will not do, Maya. Follow me.
He grabbed my hand and pulled me out of the bar and into the street.
Stand back, so I don't step on you.
After I took a few steps back, he erupted into a huge black dragon. His body shimmered with black pearl scales. His wings had a slight red tint to them. Okay, that is definitely badass. Wow, can I touch you? He huffed a laugh and shuffled closer. I slowly reached out, running the tips of my fingers along his leg. The scales felt cool to the touch, but like glass.
Want to go for a ride?
He asked. My eyes widened. I never imagined he could talk in this form. What if I fall off? He winked.
No one has fallen off yet.
He knelt his front leg down. I grabbed a bony spike on his elbow and pulled myself up on his back, which was surprisingly comfortable. It wasn't hard on my butt at all.
Hold on to my horns. I will take it easy.
With that, he reared up and started running down the street while flapping his wings. Within 3 flaps, we were airborne. My heart boomed in my chest as the adrenaline rushed through my veins. As we climbed, the wind whipped through my hair. I held on tightly and looked down at the town that was my new home. It was so much larger than I'd thought. It was then that I saw other dragons flying off in the distance. This world was so large and so new, I wondered if I would ever learn it all. Victor's dragon form was amazing. I could see his powerful muscles under his scales. He had black spikes from his head to tail with a few on his shoulders. He tilted down and we started descending, and once again, my heart took a leap. This was, by far, the best experience since coming to this place. I was exhilarated. I was free. We landed a little hard, but his knees were bent, absorbing most of the shock. I was shaking with excitement when I climbed off his back. That was amazing, I said, as I tried to straighten my hair. He smiled.
I will have to leave you for tonight, as I now have no clothes, but I'd like to see you again.
I chewed my lip. How about we meet here tomorrow?
Early,
he said.
Because we're going to grab a bite to eat. How about 5?
I nodded and stepped closer. Do you breathe fire? He turned his head away from me and blew out a tiny ball of fire.
That's all I can do in the city, or I'll burn something down.
He huffed a laugh, and a little puff of smoke came out of his nose. 5 it is the. Thank you for an amazing time, Victor. He bowed slightly.
The pleasure was all mine.
Chapter 11. Standing in the street like a baboon, I watched as Victor ran, flapped his wings, and took off into the sky. A dragon. A motherfucking dragon. A few days ago, I couldn't see any benefit to being what I was. Falling for Holly's bullshit had felt like I'd ended my very existence. Today, I rode a dragon. I was exhilarated. The adrenaline coursing through my veins made me feel like my entire body was buzzing. Not only had I met and ridden a dragon, I'd met a hot guy and had a date scheduled for the following day. Things were looking up, so I smiled at myself, shook my head, and headed back into the bar to see if I could make any new girlfriends. To my utter delight, I spotted Sally, the vampire friend of Doc Holliday's. She smiled and waved me over.
Maya, you are positively radiating.
I took a seat next to her at her high top. Vampires prefer higher ground, I teased.
Always. Here, try this.
She pushed her drink toward me. It was blood red. I gave her a look that said I might throw up.
Sally grinned.
It's not blood. Just try it. A sip of the not-too-sweet cherry drink made my mouth pucker in the most delightful way. Wow, that is good. She flagged the bartender and held up 2 fingers.
I'm so happy to see you exploring the town,
Sally said.
And that you're not under that dreadful woman's thumb anymore.
I shrugged and glanced at the table, not wanting to admit that she still had some control over me. A server dropped 2 of the red beverages on the table as she walked by.
Have you thought about what you will do once you're on your own?
She asked. I don't really know what kind of work a mage can get. To be honest, I'm still learning what it means to be a mage. She waved me off like I'd said something silly.
Your breed doesn't matter. What are your skills? What are you good at?
I don't know. I'm good at finding magical things, I guess. Holly has rented me out before and sent me on missions to find certain things. That's all I really know. Sally's blue eyes twinkled.
Oh, you know what would be fun? You should be a bounty hunter. You could, hunt people and magical things. That would be awesome.
A bounty hunter? Look at me. I laughed at her. After being starved nearly to death by Holly, I barely tipped the scale at 100 pounds. I was so thin my normal pants hung loose around the hips. Thankfully, it was the style for the time. Her eyes started drooping, and I wondered how much boozy she'd consumed already.
So you work you.
She waved again.
Eat good food, work out, and learn how to fight. No big.
Thinking she probably meant it was no big deal and couldn't finish her sentence, I smiled. Is there anyone around here who gives fighting lessons? She leaned in.
There's this really cute guy behind you.
I turned to look.
Don't.
She grabbed my wrist.
Don't look.
She giggled. I grinned at her. This had been a fierce vampire the last time I saw her. Now all I saw was an intoxicated young woman who didn't want a hot guy to notice her checking him out.
Let me tell you a secret,
she said, flagging me in closer.
I like boys and girls.
Then she covered her smile with her hand. This was getting uncomfortable. Oh, okay.
They both taste delicious.
She hiccuped.
I think I need to go to bed.
I laughed. I think that's a good idea. I blinked, and she was gone. She'd ran out of the bar so fast I didn't even see her. The server grabbed up her half-empty glass as she walked by, and I was, once again, all alone. The only thing to do was enjoy my drink and people watch. It was then that thoughts of my best friend flooded in. If she were here, I would be laughing. She'd be laughing. We'd hit the dance floor and forget about everything else. But she was gone. Rather, I was the one who left, and I could never go back.
You need a better drink,
a woman said as she sat down.
Hey,
she said, extending her hand. Hey. I took her hand and shook it.
I'm Jess. Your vampire showed up half in the bag.
Maya, and she's not my vampire. We just met the other day, and it was the only familiar face in here. Jess had chestnut hair that feathered back, a la Farrah Fawcett, circa 1975. Somehow it didn't look dated. She had a tiny dimple in her chin and warm chocolate eyes that set off her hair. Those eyes had a bit of a twinkle in them.
You like the devil's kiss?
She asked, pointing to my drink. It's actually pretty good. Not my usual, but good.
You a beer girl?
She asked. Whiskey.
Oh, you're giving bad girl vibes.
Her banter was odd, but entertaining at least. Well, this bad girl is enjoying this very girly drink. She leaned back in her chair and surveyed me.
You know, a mage should really wear leather.
My heart tripped a little. I wasn't allowed to ask what anyone else was, but people were picking me out. It was disconcerting. Why is that?
It protects you from energy attacks.
I squinted. Really? I know bikers use it for protection against road rash, but I never thought about energy. She laughed, tossing her head back.
Yum, bikers.
She waggled her brows at me.
You do have a bad girl streak.
How does the leather protect you, well, me from energy attacks? She plucked an olive out of her glass, and that's when I noticed she was drinking a martini. She pulled it off the stick and popped it into her mouth.
Well, the animal's sacrifice has something to do with it. Plus, leather is a bit of an insulator.
I chewed my lip. I have not found the clothing shops yet. Her mouth fell open.
Oh, you poor thing. A girl without a clothing store? That's a crime. So, you want to go like 6 blocks west of the bank. That whole area is nothing but clothes, jewelry, beauty shops, you name it. There are some great coffee shops down there, too. I'm presuming you're fairly new?
I nodded, feeling a bit embarrassed.
That explains why you're being so nice.
Her smile looked a tiny bit sad this time.
Mages aren't usually this nice to witches.
Well, Jess, I'm trying to make friends, so I'm stifling my inner asshole. She erupted into laughter again.
Good. Now, there's a dance floor over there. Do you dance?
I wasn't really in the mood. Not tonight. I'm just taking it easy and enjoying the crowd. Plus, I was just mourning the memory of my friendship. I didn't want to dishonor that memory by filling the hole with another dance partner.
Good, I hate dancing in a crowd. Under the moon is my favorite place to dance.
This chick was a bit odd, but it wasn't really bothering me. I was happy to have the company, to make a new friend. Thank you for telling me where the stores are. I have a date tomorrow and a new outfit might be just what I need. Her eyes widened and she grinned.
Oh, well, I love to shop. Do you want some company?
And that is how I spent over $1,000 the next day. My savings were going to dwindle fast if I didn't get my act together. Chapter 12. My new friend Jess turned out to be a real shopping addict. We hit 10 different stores before we finally reached the leather shops. That was when I discovered the differences in leather. There was a half-hour lesson in there about different tanning practices. None of it mattered to me, but I listened anyway. I was hauling around so many bags, my arms were getting tired.
We need shoes.
I need a break, I complained. She laughed at me. I had to admit it was funny that I was completely done shopping and she was still ready to go. Every dollar I spent made me feel a bit more apprehensive, and the anxiety was weighing me down as much as the bags of clothes.
Let's go get a coffee, then we hit the shoe shop. I promise, it'll be one last stop.
I shook my head. Shoes, then coffee. I want to get this done. She patted my back. Tell me something, I said, as we walked toward what I assumed was the shoe store. Sure, she said. Why are mages usually unfriendly toward witches? She chewed her lip, looking a bit sheepish. What? I asked.
I don't want to offend you, but I don't know how else to answer.
I gave her the biggest smile I could muster. You're teaching me something. I need whatever information you have, so I'm in no position to get offended. Her shoulder rose a little as she said,
Arrogance.
I could feel my eyes widen. Really? She nodded.
Mages have more juice, more power that is, so they look down on us. Because of that, witches are, generally speaking, rude to all mages, knowing they look down on us.
I couldn't take it anymore. I sat on a stone planter and plopped my bags on the sidewalk. It doesn't have to be that way. She sat next to me.
But it has been for a long time. Just try to be patient when you meet a witch. Honestly, I was pretty tipsy when I sat down. You looked like the fighting kind, and I wanted to see if I could get your dander up, but you ended up being, well, instead of being an ass, I wanted to get to know you.
I grinned. Okay, crazy lady. Let's look at shoes so we can find my car and pile this shit in the trunk. When we went inside, I was astonished at the sheer amount of footwear. The place was huge, and there were shoes as far as I could see.
We can put our bags over here. No one will bother them.
She pointed at a bench. I happily placed my bags down.
This way.
I followed her toward the center, where there were rows and rows of motorcycle and combat boots.
With what you've chosen as outfits, I highly suggest boots like these.
She spent the next half hour talking to me about breathability and support. Finally, I settled on 4 pair, 2 black, 2 brown, and 1 pair of sneakers. With my final bill, I was feeling a bit spooked about my funds. We found my car, piled everything in the trunk, then hit a coffee shop where I thankfully sat with a large dark roast.
Are you excited about your date?
She asked. I nodded and grinned. Is that silly? I'm a little old to get excited for a date. Jess shook her head.
Absurd. It's new. Dragons are hot. I'm a little jealous.
I leaned back in my chair and sipped at my coffee. I'm a little rusty, but I figured he'll have to like me for me or get lost. You know? She winked.
Damn straight.
So, what do you do for work? I asked, trying to get ideas.
I'm a secretary in the Human District.
Really? I totally expected you to be something a lot more glamorous. Her smile widened.
I'll take that as a compliment, but it pays the bills and I'm good at it. Plus, humans don't really know what I am, so being a witch is no big deal. It's not like I walk around with a pentagram around my neck.
If this is off limits, please let me know. But how does your magic work? Her gaze fell on her coffee for a minute before she looked at me again.
Witch magic doesn't work like your magic. We have to call on the elements, usually in groups. We have to have spells and ingredients. Your magic just is. You manifest it. I can do small stuff alone, but anything important, I need my coven for, or at least a few more witches.
I furrowed my brow. I'm no scientist, but it seems like physics doesn't apply to us. She held up her hands.
I don't know anything about physics.
I wonder. A giggle escaped her lips.
You're going to leave me hanging?
I just wonder if a mage and a witch can do magic together. Her eyes widened and her mouth fell open.
Maya, you shouldn't say stuff like that in public. You don't want to alienate other mages.
Don't you want to know if it works? She shook her head.
Your energy could hurt me.
Oh, I had no idea. Jess waved it off.
That's okay. You're new. Just, not a good idea.
There was a bit more small talk before I left to go home. It took forever for me to drag all of the bags inside and put everything away. By the time I was done, I have very little time left to shower and get ready for my date. Dressed in brand new dark brown leather pants, a black tank and jacket to match the pants, I laced up the boots and checked myself out in the mirror. The leather jacket did nothing to show off my chest, which was fine. If I wanted to show that off, I could just remove the coat. My hair was down in big waves, and I put on a very small amount of makeup. Blessed with a good complexion, I only put on some eyeshadow, mascara, and some lip gloss. More than that wouldn't have looked right. It might have looked right, but it wouldn't look like me. It was time to go, but when I stepped out of my door, I found Holly sitting at the end of my drive staring at me.
Where are you going?
She demanded. I laughed and shook my head. You'd better move your car or I'll run into it.
Maya, we need to talk.
Not now, I barked. Move! I could see the war brewing inside her. Did she want to challenge me here, out in the open? But she couldn't stand my disobedience. It was all over her face, easy to read. She tilted her head down.
I expect to see you at the shop on Monday, without damaging anything. Am I clear?
Sure. Now move. I climbed in my car and fired up the engine and watched as she waddled to her car and got in. As she drove away, I felt my arms and legs shaking with adrenaline. I had unknowingly prepared to fight her. I had to figure this out, and fast. I drove to the bar where I met Victor the night before and parked. He was standing in the street when I opened my door, fitting jeans and a tight black shirt. Damn, that was my weak spot. He looked delicious. Hey, I said as I approached.
Hey, you hungry?
I nodded.
You look awesome,
he said, giving me a once-over. I'm sorry to say my heart did a little pitter-pat, and I felt like an awkward teen for a split second. Thank you. His dimples grew a little deeper as he smiled.
About a block away is a really great restaurant.
I don't know what he said as we walked. I was focused on how hard my heart was beating. I couldn't tell you if we were heading for Chinese, Greek, or Italian. I was just walking next to him, focusing on not tripping over my own feet. Chapter 13. Dinner with Victor was over. I couldn't recall what we had discussed, though I felt like I was having the time of my life. I was so far inside my own head it was weird. I wasn't usually this self-conscious. He was, after all, just a guy. I mean, he was a dragon, but still a dude. That smile, though, and his eyes.
Maya, are you with me?
He asked. I felt my cheeks heat. I'm sorry, what? He laughed.
You said you were thinking about being a bounty hunter?
Oh, that. I waved it off. A friend suggested it. I'm really good at finding things. I'm not sure about hunting people, though. I have to learn some fighting skills first. I should really learn about, different breeds, too. Suddenly, I felt really embarrassed to have mentioned it. When had I mentioned it? He nodded.
I can hook you up with someone. I know a really great hand-to-hand combat teacher. As far as the magical stuff goes, I can't help you. I just burn my opponents.
His laugh was infectious. Did I really want to try bounty hunting? Who would teach me about magic since no one wanted to discuss it?
You up for another flight?
His eyes twinkled. You're kidding me, right? He shook his head.
You seem to enjoy it.
I had. It had been the most exhilarating experience since I got to Atlantis. He paid for dinner, and then we walked outside, my heart tripping inside my chest. The sun had sunken so that a dull orange and purple glow radiated from the skyline. We stopped outside an SUV. He opened the door and pulled out a backpack.
If you wouldn't mind wearing this, it has clothes in it for when I shift back.
I was tempted to throw it back in his truck. Instead, I slung it over my shoulders. So, what exactly happens to your clothes when you shift? His lips quirked.
For us, they vaporize. I don't shift in public often. That gets expensive. I mean, I have no problems being naked, but there are kids around. You know?
I nodded.
Let's go to the park. I can shift there without causing any damage.
As I followed him, I tried to wrap my head around the physics of what was going on. How did a guy who weighed 200 pounds transform into a dragon that probably weighed a ton? Where did all that extra mass go when he shifted back? I'd never get this answer, but still, it plagued me. When we reached a clearing, he put some distance between us and erupted into his enormous dragon. I ran my hands along his scales, marveling at the beauty in them. He knelt down, and I climbed on as I had the day before.
You ready?
And waiting, I shouted with a laugh. With that, he took off at a run, and we lifted off. My heart erupted as it had the night before. As we soared higher and higher, I looked around at the landscape. Flying had been the most magical thing I'd experienced so far, and that included learning that I could manifest energy balls. I could not stop the laughter from erupting as he dove toward the earth. It was like riding a roller coaster without all the jerking. His movements were smooth and graceful. We landed in the backyard of a massive estate.
I'll take those,
he said as he nudged the backpack. I took it off and held it out. Be right back, he said. Then he took the backpack in his massive teeth and walked behind the house. A few moments later, he came out in black slacks and a blue polo that hugged ever muscle. Yum. Whose house is this? I asked. He shrugged.
This is my family's den.
I stepped back. You took me to meet your parents? With a nervous laugh, he scratched the back of his head.
Not entirely. I mean, not like that. Well, I guess they are here. I just wanted to show you a bit of me. Oh, hell, never mind. We can go.
Victor, I thought I heard voices.
Jess walked out of the house wearing a long silk dress. I looked back and forth between them.
Maya, you've met my sister, Jessica.
Sister! Sister! You said you were a witch! I folded my arms across my chest, the betrayal stinging like a slap in the face.
You did what?
Victor spat. She shrugged.
I didn't think she would believe me. She's a mage. She didn't even reach out for my magic. But then, I ended up liking you and didn't want to tell you I'd lied.
I like her. Did, as in past tense.
Even thinking I was a witch, she was nice to me, so I went with it.
She shrugged, turned, and walked away. I wanted to spit. I wanted to punch her. I wanted to rip her perfect hair right out of her head. He sighed.
I'm very sorry about my sister. Well, she's fairly spoiled. I'm sorry. This was a mistake.
I held up my hand. You weren't the one who lied. I'm fucking pissed, but not at you.
Me too. Way to ruin my date, sis.
His words were low, irritated.
Aren't you coming?
Jess called.
Mother is making drinks.
Victor glanced at me.
She does make good drinks, but I must warn you. The apple, that is my sister, didn't fall far from the tree.
I scrunched my brows. Why did you bring me here then?
I'm asking myself the same thing right about now.
He shook his head.
Trying to impress you has turned into a train wreck in a matter of seconds.
That made me smile. He had been trying to impress me. That had to win him some points. Am I allowed to be an asshole? He stepped closer and dropped his voice.
You don't need anyone's permission for anything, Maya. I see you. I see something strong in you. Don't ever let anyone push you ever again. And that goes double for my family.
I leaned in and pressed my lips against his. It was a kiss, a short, soft kiss, and when I backed up, I could see the surprise in his eyes. Let's go have drinks then. We had not been poor. My mother and I weren't rich. Hell, we weren't even comfortable for the most part, but we hadn't been poor either. But when I stepped into the monstrosity of a house that Victor called home, I almost felt like a chimney sweep, leaving coal dust all over ivory satin sheets. The house made me feel unworthy. That would not do. This was going to take Oscar award-winning acting skills. I pulled my shoulders back and lifted my chin as I strutted after Jess, whose silk gown fluttered behind her. We first walked through a foyer the size of my house, then a dining area. That was followed by a seating area, a hall, and finally a lounge. There was a woman just as stunning as Jess, standing in her own silk dress with silk shoulder wrap draped over her shoulders.
Ah, dear, there you are. Oh, and you have company. Fantastic. I get to try out my skills.
She walked up to me, looked me from head to toe, lifted my chin to look in my eyes, and smiled.
Good God, your skin is lovely. Perfect job on the makeup, dear. Too much would make you look like a whore. You had the good sense to accentuate, not to spackle and paint your face like a harlot. Now tell me, do you like coffee?
Hi there, my name is Maya. So nice to meet you. Her smile widened.
Ah, yes,
she said on a breath.
Pleasantries. Very well, my name is June. How do you do, Maya?
Good. Yes, I do like coffee. She nodded, seemingly pleased that I answered her question after a bit of ribbing. Socialites were all about manners, and she'd forgotten hers. Unexpectedly, she leaned in and sniffed me. I had no idea how to react to that, so I didn't.
You haven't had alcohol today?
She squinted.
Vodka?
She held up one finger.
No, not harsh enough for you. Whiskey. You enjoy whiskey.
I had to admit, this was starting to entertain me. Yes, ma'am.
Very good,
she said, then turned, walked to the bar, and started mixing something. Jess rolled her eyes.
Mother fancies herself a psychic when it comes to people's drink of choice. She's very much a dragon, not a psychic, yet she enjoys her little game.
She picked up her martini glass and sipped.
She is the one who discovered I like dry martinis, though.
Victor, darling,
she called over her shoulder.
Fancy a drink?
I'll have what she's having,
he answered as he smiled at me.
Figured I'll try something new.
June walked over, bent down, and handed 2 martini glasses over. I took it and looked down at what looked like a latte in a martini glass. I sniffed. I could smell coffee, vanilla, and something else.
Well, go on,
she urged. I sipped. To my complete amazement, she'd made a coffee martini, and it was absolutely delicious.
Wow, you like this?
Victor said, wrinkling his nose. You don't? I asked, astonished. His mother took the glass out of his hand.
You may go fetch a beer.
She sat the martini glass down on the table in front of me.
There you go, dear. There's already a second one when you're ready.
Victor's chuckle was barely audible as he stood from the couch and went to the bar. I heard the distinct sound of a fridge and bottles clinking. June sat in a high back chair facing the couch.
You do know you cannot be mated with my son. He has to find his dragon mate.
I froze with the glass half lifted to my lips. Mate?
She means married,
Jess offered.
A dragon needs another dragon to breed, and Mother wants us to continue the family line.
Okay, we're getting ahead of ourselves a bit. This is just 2 people on a date.
Dates lead to sex.
June waved her hand as she spoke.
Sex leads to love, which leads to the inevitable. Have all the sex you wish, but do not, under any circumstances, fall in love with my son. Understood?
Or I'll burn you to a crisp,
Victor and Jess said in unison. I could not help myself. I laughed. You are all a bit fucked up. You know that, right?
Not really. Dragons are exceedingly rare,
Jess offered.
The elders are now really insistent. They're even considering making it law.
Jesus Christ. My first date in Atlantis, and I'm looking for Kool-Aid.
Kool-Aid?
Victor asked as he sat next to me. Never mind. It's a human euphemism. I tossed back the first martini and scooped up the second as I set the first glass down. I was ready to get the hell out of this nut house.
Who is your creator, dear?
She asked. I swallowed hard and looked her in the eye. This wasn't a topic I wanted to discuss. God. She laughed.
Touché.
Holly Havens,
Jess answered.
That dreadful relic dealer.
She asked with her eyes wide. I turned to Victor. You ready to go?
Yes.
He said as he stood. I guzzled the rest of the second drink. Thanks for the drink, June. It really was the best thing I've ever had. She smiled and nodded.
The pleasure was mine. You two have fun.
As we walked outside, I began to laugh.
What?
He said, his eyes wide. Just not what I expected, the look of horror on your face when she talked about mating. I laughed again. He chuckled.
I'm really sorry.
Your game needs serious work, my friend. I was startled when I felt his hand in mine.
I can make it up to you.
Victor, really, you have nothing to make up for. Dinner was great, even though I was sort of zoned out. The flight was beyond awesome. Seriously, that will never get old. This was just comic relief for me. You seem so perfect, then you take me here, and, well, I feel sort of sorry for you to come from a family like that. I shrugged. I just wanted to make friends, to meet people. That's it. So far, that has been accomplished.
I'll be right back,
he said. Then he ran around the corner of the house, and within moments, a dragon was walking toward me with a backpack in his mouth. I happily took the bag, strapped it on, and climbed on his back. Night had fallen, and the air was much cooler, making me feel thankful for the warm leather attire. We flew for so long, my face felt numb. Finally, we landed in a pasture. He took the bag and changed behind a tree. That's damned inconvenient. Too bad you can't get your clothes to shift with you. He laughed.
Trust me, the wizards are on it. Many of us have hired them to figure this out.
We sat under the moon quietly for a while. It didn't feel awkward. We both just sat, looking up at the full moon.
My mother isn't wrong, Maya. I'm not available for a serious relationship. I don't even want one right now.
He sounded a little sad. I shrugged. Honestly, Victor, it's like I just entered a whole new world. I'm not sure I want to settle down at all, let alone anytime soon. Don't sweat it.
Are you sure you're a girl?
He chuckled. Pretty sure. Why?
Women aren't usually this agreeable.
I'm not agreeable. I'm just being honest. As long as I'm being honest, I spent the better part of the last years chained up in a basement. The thought of being chained down again is not at all appealing. Heat came off of Victor in waves.
Someone chained you in a basement?
His voice was more of a snarl than a growl. I shrugged. Holly, that's why I don't know much about magic, mine or anyone else's. I managed to free myself from the basement, but I'm still tied to her. For now. I looked at him. His eyes were blazing, but looked sad at the same time.
I'm sorry, Maya. That's terrible. No one should treat you that way.
I don't want to talk about it. Not really. I have a fresh start. I plan on making the most of it. I just have a lot to figure out. He put his arm around me and pulled me closer to him. I wasn't used to leaning on anyone, literally or figuratively, but his warmth and, I don't know, company maybe, led me to lean in on his chest. Part of me wanted to cry in relief. The tenderness I felt right now was something I hadn't felt in so long. It almost hurt.
I will always be your friend, Maya. I swear that much. All you ever have to do is call.
You barely know me, I teased.
You know my sister hates everyone. She said you were nice. She doesn't think anyone is nice. I see strength in you, the same strength I see in dragons. It's stoic. It's heated. It's passionate. We've known each other 24 hours now. We'll just call this the first 24.
I looked up at him, into his bright green eyes, which I could barely see in the moonlight. I looked at that strong jaw. This wasn't the most romantic discussion in the world, and I certainly didn't feel swept off my feet. When I got ready for this date, it wasn't what I had envisioned. Still, I wanted to kiss those lips. And so... Chapter 14. The tall grass swayed in the cool breeze as we gazed up at the stars and the moon, talking about everything and nothing. Oh, there were breaks in the chatting, when our lips met, hands explored, and breaths became heavy, but then we'd cool down and resume the easy conversation. It was a bit of a tease, but I was okay with it. Our earlier conversation wasn't bullshit, at least not on my part. I was finally free and not ready to get tied down again. It wasn't that I was against rolling around in the grass naked with this very sexy man, but I was okay, taking it slow too. I didn't have a problem easing into things. For now, freedom was all the high I needed. Well, that and flying on a dragon. Nothing would ever top that. Hours had gone by, and the sky began to turn pink as the sun threatened to crash our party. Victor sat up.
Come on, it's late. I need to get you home.
It's actually early, I teased, but I'm up for a flight any time. His hand wound around the back of my neck, pulling me in close for one last breath-stealing kiss. Then he strutted off to shift. I unabashedly watched him strip, and it was worth the heat in my cheeks. When we took off, I could feel the dew on my face as the damp air whooshed past us. I squinted my eyes and leaned closer to his neck, trying to block the air which was causing me to shiver. I held on tight and hunched in, trying to keep as much body heat in as I could. The leather helped, but only a bit. By the time we landed, every muscle cramped. I had a hard time climbing off as my muscles were tensed with shivers. He looked at me and tilted his head.
Shit,
he gasped as he quickly transformed into a naked man. He scooped me up and put me in his truck. My teeth clacked together as I tried to argue that I had a perfectly fine car to drive. Instead, he climbed in naked, cranked the engine, and when the Bronco fired up, he grabbed my hands and blew warm air on them.
Give me directions to your house. I'll take you home and get you warm.
I pointed, teeth chattering. He drove. After a mile, he turned the heat on full blast.
I'm so sorry. I forget about the temperature change. The higher you go, the colder it feels. I don't feel it in my dragon form.
That's okay, I stuttered. Lift. I clenched my jaw, determined to stop chattering. This wasn't flattering at all. The sun had not yet risen, or I could just pull some energy in and warm myself up. My body was probably still depleted from the years with Holly. Sure, I'd had a few meals, slept well, and bathed. But the body took more than a few days to recover from the neglect and torture I'd suffered. When we finally pulled up, Victor cut the engine and raced around, still naked, and jerked my door open. Without saying a word, he scooped me up and rushed to the front door. I barely got the ward down before he slung the door open.
Bathroom?
He asked. With a shaky hand, I pointed toward the stairs. He took them 2 at a time with so much grace, he barely jostled me. He put me down once we reached the bathroom, and that's when I got a look at myself in the mirror. My lips were blue, my face ashen. He turned the water on and closed the drain on the tub. Then he turned to me and started gently peeling off my clothes. I didn't fight him, didn't feel embarrassed either. I wanted in that hot water in the worst way. He knelt to unbutton my pants and saw a bruise on my ribs, one that had not yet healed. His brows pulled together, but he said nothing. He unbuttoned my pants and tugged them down. That's when he saw the satin panties with the lace trim. He paused for a moment, then pulled my pants to the floor. I stood there in nothing but panties. Victor scooped me up and lowered me into the water, settling in behind me. The heat from his body and the warm water stopped the shivering almost instantly. I leaned back on his chest, muscles finally relaxing.
For the record,
He said softly.
this was not how I intended to get you naked.
I laughed. My neck and shoulders ached from all the shivering. He dipped his hands in the water, then rubbed up and down my arms.
I'm really sorry, Maya. I had no idea you'd gotten this cold.
I sighed, and the warm water made it past my hips and started to crawl up to my core. It's not your fault. I'm underweight. That's probably not good for a mage.
Uh-huh,
He said. After a moment of silence, he asked,
And why is that?
I leaned my head back and rested it on his shoulder, staring at the ceiling. It's been a rough couple of years, but things are getting better now. I should start putting weight back on soon. He wrapped his arms around me but didn't squeeze. He just held me.
There was something about you, in the bar. You had this look about you, like you were a survivor. I think that's what drew me to you.
Words evaded me. How did one respond to being seen as a survivor? This water feels like heaven, I said on a gasp. My muscles, though sore, had relaxed. I could feel my fingers and toes again. I bounced with his chest as he laughed.
I can't remember the last time I soaked in a tub. This is nice. I love these old barefoot bathtubs.
You mean bear claw? I said with a laugh. He nuzzled into my hair.
You have a great laugh.
Thank you, I said.
Do you like being a mage?
He asked. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I didn't even know what it was to be a mage yet, but I didn't want to sit in silence either. You know what sounds good right now?
Tell me.
A snack, a drink, and stretching out in bed. He kissed the back of my head.
Your wish is my command.
I stayed in the tub for a few minutes and watched him dry off, wrap a towel around his waist, and head down the stairs. I smiled as I could hear his damp, bare feet pad around as he tried to find the kitchen. I waited for another minute, smiling as I could hear cabinets opening and closing as he searched. Then I stripped off the wet panties, dried off, grabbed the robe off the back of the door, and slung it on. Once in the kitchen, I went to the pantry and pulled out a bottle of red wine and handed it to him. Then I went to the drawer and pulled out my mother's old corkscrew. He uncorked the bottle and sniffed.
My mother would lose her mind if she knew I was drinking cheap wine.
I grinned and grabbed a box of frozen fried chicken and dumped it on a sheet pan and tossed it in the oven. Then I grabbed a couple of glasses, juice glasses, and handed them over. Victor laughed. I knew what he was thinking. His prim and proper mother would absolutely lose it over drinking cheap wine out of juice glasses. He poured the wine and handed me a glass. After taking a sip, his brows rose.
This is actually really tasty.
Taste doesn't have a dollar sign. I wiggled my brows before taking a drink. I nodded at him to follow me to the back porch where the sun was peeking into the backyard. I held my hand out and absorbed a bit of sunlight. The soreness in my muscles eased instantly. We sat on the porch and drank wine until the chicken was done. Then we ate, finished the bottle of wine, and somehow made it up to the bed, full, exhausted, and a little tipsy. I'd never been tipsy at 9 in the morning, but somehow, since I'd been up all night and my date was technically still going, it didn't seem to matter. In my bedroom, he undid the rope to my robe and opened it. His brows furrowed. Well, that's enough to kill the mood. I stepped back.
No. No.
He stepped closer and pointed at my rib, then ran his hand over a bruise on my hip.
I thought the light healed you.
I looked down. Oh, that. It only heals you if you get to the light soon after the injury, or so I'm told. A bruise is just blood gathered under the skin. It has to reabsorb the blood from the broken vessels naturally. It doesn't hurt anymore. It's just ugly. He stepped closer.
Nothing about you is ugly.
I grinned. Likewise.
I'm going to take this off,
he said, but it was more of a question. The second I nodded, he slid his around my waist and pulled me to him, then pulled the robe off. He lay on the bed, then climbed in, pulling the blankets over us. His lips explored my body. After the hot bath, the food, and wine, I was about as relaxed as a girl could get. The release came quicker than I expected, and he was soon inside me. It wasn't rushed, but we both found ourselves breathless and sated. I dozed off to the feeling of his fingers gently stroking up and down my side. I was warm and safe and happy. The rest of the day had been a series of long naps, trips to the kitchen, and more lovemaking. It was definitely my preferred way to spend a Saturday. When afternoon turned to evening, Victor finally said he had to go, but insisted I keep the Bronco until the next day. Without clothes, he planned to fly home in his dragon form.
Just put the keys in the glove box. No one here steals cars. It's safe.
He gave me a quick kiss before walking into my backyard and shifting. He winked his large eye at me before he took off into the night sky. Despite the naps, I found myself tired enough to sleep, and that's what I did. I lay in bed and smiled as I drifted off to sleep, sated in every way imaginable. Chapter 15. Sunday morning, I woke refreshed. After some toaster waffles and frozen sausages, I figured I'd better take Victor's truck back into town and reclaim my car. I climbed in and fired up the Ford Bronco. It was a beast. It roared to life, and when I put it in drive, the truck's engine sounded fierce. As crazy as it sounds, driving the truck gave me a thrill. The 302-liter V8 and the truck's heavy frame made me feel damned near invincible. The spot next to my car was open, so I pulled in, cut the engine, and tossed the keys in the glove box. When I sat in my car, I felt like my ass was on the blacktop. Sitting in the higher truck was much better. When I went to start the car, it sputtered and coughed. I tried again, and the engine only clicked. I still hadn't gotten around to replacing the battery, and since it wasn't charging, there was a chance the alternator had taken a shit too. Damn! I cursed as I popped the trunk. I grabbed the jumper cables out, figuring I'd use Victor's truck to jump the damned thing.
Maya?
Victor asked as he approached. Hey, I said, holding up the cables. Battery is dead. Victor pointed toward the front of my car.
It's not just the battery. It's leaking something.
I sighed, feeling defeated, and leaned against the car.
I'll go in that diner and use the phone. Let's get it towed to the mechanics and see what's going on.
He gave me a pat on the shoulder as he jogged past me into the small diner. He came out a few minutes later and waited with me. He handed me a small paper cup with coffee. Thanks, I said, then took a sip.
It won't be long. They're only a few blocks away. He's bringing a spare battery just in case.
Then he paused and nudged me.
You look good, Maya. You have more color in your cheeks.
That compliment made my cheeks heat, but I said nothing. I'd never been particularly good at receiving compliments. Truthfully, it was a bit awkward standing next to the guy I'd just spent the night with on the first date. Before the silence could get too awkward, a tow truck pulled up behind my car.
Hey, I'm Jason.
He waved.
Pop the hood?
I nodded, reached in, and pulled the latch. He looked under the hood for a few minutes, then walked around to the back of the car, knelt down and looked, then shook his head as he stood up, dusting off his hands and his bib overalls.
Ma'am, your radiator is busted. The alternator looks like it's locked up tight, and your leaf springs are rusted through. This thing is a death trap.
I had some money, but it wasn't enough to keep me going indefinitely. If I spent money on a new car, I'd really need to figure out what kind of job I could do to earn a living, and quickly.
Can you afford to get a new car?
Victor asked quietly. I chewed my lip and nodded. But I'll need to find paying work soon if I do, and I'm still tied to my creator. My stomach nodded. If I took on a second job, one that actually paid, I'd be okay.
I'll tow it on in. You can call and tell me what you decide to do,
he said, handing me a card. Then I watched as he loaded my car on his flatbed and drove off with it. Slightly panicked, I started looking around for a phone booth so I could look up the closest car dealer. I had never bought a car on my own. The old POS that had been towed away, I'd purchased with my mother.
Where are you going?
Victor asked as I started to walk down the block. To find a dealership, I called back. I could hear footsteps slapping the sidewalk behind me.
Hang on!
Victor was jogging up behind me.
You're going the wrong way, first of all.
My gaze dropped to the sidewalk. I'm not familiar with the place yet. I was looking for a phone booth.
We're friends, aren't we?
I nodded, keeping my gaze down.
Good. Then I can give you a lift to the dealership. I'm in the market for a new car anyway. Something sporty.
Finally, I lifted my gaze to meet his. You mean you don't want the Bronco anymore? He chuckled.
No. It's too big. I want a muscle car anyway. I was thinking maybe an Olds 442 or a Dodge Challenger. The truck was my dad's idea. I never have been fond of it.
I'll buy it, I blurted. He scrunched his brow.
Really?
I nodded and hoped we could agree on a price.
Well, then the way I see it, you'll have to accompany me to the dealership anyway. Whatever they offer me on trade for the Bronco is what you pay. Deal?
Knowing dealerships always low, balled a trade-in, how could I say no? Deal. We smiled at each other.
Car shopping it is then.
Victor climbed in the driver's seat for possibly the last time and drove us a few miles until we reached the dealership. He looked around at the classic cars they had in one corner of the lot. I waited as he test drove 3 of them before finally settling on the Dodge Challenger. I sat next to him as they haggled over the price of the car. Then finally, they made him an offer of $4,000 for his truck. He didn't blink, said there wouldn't be a trade, and I now knew what I had to pay for the truck. It was going to be mine. When Victor was done with his purchase, he handed me the keys to the truck.
Just have the money transferred over when you get a chance. The bank will handle everything. I will sign off the title, and we're good to go.
I held the keys in my hand, energy vibrating through me. I loved that thing, and as vulnerable as I felt lately, it was nice to have a set of badass wheels. After getting turned around a few times, I finally found my way back to my house. I picked up a stack of mail outside the door, a telephone directory, a bill for electricity, and a notice from the Majeri. I gulped, then headed inside. When I got inside the house, the phone was ringing. I stood there, shocked. Had the phone been turned on? I picked it up.
Ms. Delacroix, this is Atlantis Phone Company. Your phone service has been activated. Do you have a pen?
Hang on, I said, setting the phone down and racing to the table in the hall. I grabbed a pen and notepad. Okay. The woman gave me my new telephone number. I thanked her and ended the call. I stared at the stack of mail, then pulled the letter from the Majeri and opened it with shaky hands. Ms. Maya Delacroix, your presence has been requested at the headquarters of the Majeri. Please report Monday morning at 10 a.m. I swallowed hard, my hands shaking. I didn't know if it was a good thing or a horrific thing that the Majeri wanted to see me. Holly hadn't trained me at all. So what if they decided to take my immortality, my life? Then the Serenity Prayer came to my mind. This was not something I had any control over. The only thing I could do was show up and be truthful. That's when the rage started to boil in my gut. Holly had done this to me. This was her fault. I didn't even know what a mage was before meeting her, and she nabbed me shortly after losing my mother, when I was the most vulnerable. I never got to finish grieving before I was chained up in her basement, facing daily abuse and neglect. No one would hurt me again. Of that much I was damned sure. Sitting at the kitchen table, I clutched a mug of coffee and stared at the wood grain. I needed a job, an income. I had no formal training at anything, but I was good at finding things. Maybe Sally was right. I could be a bounty hunter. What was the worst that could happen? I could fail and be in the same exact position. I went back to the foyer and grabbed the telephone directory and thumbed through the business pages. I found a self-defense class and called them, leaving a message on their machine. Then I walked to the storage room off the foyer. That could be my office. I opened the door, which creaked on its hinges. There were boxes of Mom's old stuff in there. A trip down to the basement lead to 30 minutes of knocking down webs and sweeping up dust from it, sitting unoccupied and unused for a few years. Then I carried the boxes down and neatly stacked them up. A pang of hunger had me looking at the clock, realizing that it was turning to evening. I threw a pizza in the oven, then grabbed the mop and set off to mop the hardwood floor. By the time the kitchen timer went off, the floor was sparkling clean. I ate my pizza while standing. I didn't want to sit down and lose momentum. I cracked open a can of Coke and slugged it down while scarfing down half the pizza, then washed the grease from my hands and grabbed the Windex and paper towel. When I was done, the windows were gleaming. I turned the light off and left the door open to let the air circulate, then finished the other half of the pizza. The second I wasn't busy, my mind began to wander back to the letter from the McGarry, and the fretting began. Frustrated with myself, I went and ran a bath, grabbed a cold beer, put my little radio in the bathroom, turned on a rock station, and settled into the hot water. Focusing on another challenge, I thought about how I was going to handle Holly. She hated cursing, so I was about to start cursing a lot more around her. She grew unreasonably emotional when things broke at the shop, so glass was going to get very slippery. I couldn't be rude to customers, because they would be potential clients someday, but that didn't mean I had to be nice to Holly. I'd never be nice to her again. I'd felt her wrath for too long, so she had at least that much coming to her. My lips spread into a wide smile. Maya, the asshole. I like it. Chapter 16. The next morning, I drove to Holly's store in my shiny new Ford Bronco. She was unlocking the door when I pulled up and turned, scowling at the truck.
What on earth?
She grumbled. It's my new wheels. Is there a problem? I smiled down at her, my belly near to bursting with all the food I'd crammed down before I left. There was something about facing this woman with a full stomach that felt like a giant fuck you. That made me smile wider.
What are you grinning at?
She said as she crossed her arms over her chest. It was time to put my best food forward. An old cranky bitch, what are you looking at?
Language,
she screeched before turning and opening the door.
Get to work,
she said, waving her hand over her head.
Much to do today.
With a giddiness I had not felt in a very long time, I jogged up the stairs to the crates. The very first thing I did was find the blade I had tucked away and tucked it down the back of my pants, hiding it under my jacket. Stealing was wrong, of course it was. But this woman had used me as slave labor for years. A dagger didn't even scratch the surface of what I was owed. I would not call it stealing, more like restitution. I kept an eye on the time, but found myself working away like I had in the past. The crate I was working had had nothing magical, so I cleaned and cataloged everything inside. Items were placed on numbered shelves that Holly could inventory later and move items to the main level as shelf space became available. I grabbed the empty crate and carried it down the stairs. It was much easier now, so easy, in fact, that I understood how weak and emaciated I'd been before. Sure, I was still rail thin, but I was fed. I had energy. My muscles were burning the nutrients they needed. The dagger at my back was vibrating. It felt like a hum at the small of my back. I hoped the hell that troll didn't hear it. After placing the empty crate by the delivery door, I dusted off my hands, then glanced at the clock and smiled. "Oh, Holly," I called out as I approached her. She turned to face me.
What is it?
"Can you tell me where the McGarry's headquarters is located?" Her brows knitted.
Why on earth would you need to know that?
I was hoping you would ask. I reached in my back pocket and pulled out the letter. They requested my presence there today in half an hour. She snatched the paper out of my fingers and looked down at it, then back up at me.
What is this about?
I shrugged. How the fuck would I know? Her face burned red.
Do not use foul language in my store.
So, I said, ignoring her, where is that building? Her curly hair wiggled as she fumed.
What did you do, Maya?
I quirked a brow and tilted my head. What are you worried about? They're asking for me, not you. I mean, you haven't done anything wrong. Have you, Holly? Her mouth worked, but no words came out. Uh-huh, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. She put her pen down and grabbed her purse.
I'll take you.
Just then, the doorbell tinkled as a customer entered the store. I think directions would be best. I'd hate to tell them that you refused to tell me where the building is. The address was at the top of the notice. I just didn't know the roads yet. I grabbed the piece of paper from her and folded it up, then tucked it in my back pocket. The dagger at my back was vibrating hard, and it was getting hard to ignore.
I'll be right with you.
She called out to the customer, then flagged me to follow her. A map of the town was framed on the wall. I'd never, ever looked at it. I just thought it was an old map. This whole time, my salvation sat right in front of my face.
The store is here.
She pointed to a red dot on the map. Then she ran her finger 6 blocks to the south and 3 blocks to the west.
That's the road. It won't be hard to spot the building. It's quite impressive.
Thank you, I said, then patted her on top of the head. She slapped my hand away, and I laughed as I walked out the door. When I got to the truck, I pulled the dagger out and stuffed it in the glove box. Then, using the crank, I rolled down the driver's window and put my elbow up on the door, letting the warm breeze blow through my fingers as I drove. The sun was shining, and the air smelled of lilacs as they were in full bloom. Holly wasn't wrong. When I turned onto the street, I needed to be on. A massive building with huge pillars took up the whole block. I parked the truck, then pulled the paper out of my pocket as I hopped out. My hands became sweaty as I climbed the steps and opened the door. A receptionist sat at a desk with a typewriter and a phone.
May I help you?
I handed her the paper, hand shaking slightly. She glanced at it, then smiled, handing it back.
Ah, Ms. Delacroix, right this way.
Her red hair was wound into a French twist that I watched wobble slightly as her heels clacked against the stone floor. My heart was starting to hammer in my chest, and my throat became dry. When we stopped in front of a door, she opened it and motioned me in. I stepped through to see what looked like a courtroom, except there were about 5 judges instead of 1. Doc stood behind a podium off to the right.
Maya Delacroix, I presume.
A woman with long black hair had stood and addressed me. Yeah, that's me. She held her hand out to the podium on the left.
Please stand there.
I did as she asked. An older gentleman with salt and pepper hair looked at Doc.
Kidnapping a major's a very serious allegation.
My eyes widened. Were they talking about me? Doc nodded.
Yes, sir. This is why I answered your summons willingly, and without a member of the Sanguine Council present. I in no way kidnapped Ms. Delacroix. I paid Ms. Havens a fee to hire her progeny for a period of 2 days. The bank can verify the transaction.
The man looked at me.
I'd like to hear your side of the story.
My side of what story? I asked dumbly.
Did Mr. Holliday kidnap you? Hold you against your will?
I burst out laughing. No, not in the least. The man's brows shot up.
Really? Because your creator claimed she could not reach you?
Well, I was at my home when she found me, exactly where I was supposed to meet her. Mr. Holliday paid her to have me go through some of his antiques. That's what I did. He helped me sort through his items, then a few of his friends took me home, bought me pizza, and hung out for a while. I was never kidnapped.
The woman with the long black hair spoke again.
Do you have any idea why Ms. Havens would make this allegation?
She wasn't looking at me, so I remained quiet. Doc lifted his chin, holding a folder in his hand.
I do, if I may approach you with the evidence.
She waved him up. He handed the folder over to her, then walked back to his podium and stood with his hands folded. The woman held up what looked like photos.
I'm not sure I understand.
Ms. Delacroix, would you step out from the podium a foot or so?
Doc asked. Nervously, I took a few steps to the right.
How tall are you, Maya?
Doc asked. 5'10", I think. Doc smiled and nodded.
Good. Now how much did you weigh at your mother's funeral?
I swallowed hard. About 145. He nodded.
And now?
Maybe 100.
The judges looked from side to side, shuffling photos back and forth, then looking at them.
When I went to Ms. Haven's store, Maya had dark circles under her eyes. She was dirty and tired.
He cleared his throat.
Apologies, Maya.
He gave me an apologetic smile.
When Maya did not speak fast enough, Ms. Haven struck her in the head. It was my strong belief that she was abusing her learner.
There was murmuring behind the bench now. I swallowed, still standing out in the open, feeling vulnerable.
Did you question Ms. Delacroix about her treatment?
Doc pulled his shoulders back.
I have been a lawman most of my mortal and immortal life. That should be enough of a testimony. However, I did question Maya. A spell has been placed on her to prevent her from speaking directly, so I had to question her indirectly. She indicated that she was, in fact, abused and neglected by Holly Havens.
Those are serious allegations, young lady.
The salt and pepper-haired man said. My brows rose. Really? How do we prove that they are more than allegations? I'm skin and bone. When Mr. Holliday hired me, it was the first hot shower I'd had in 3 years. The first hot meal. I blinked. Holly's spell didn't seem to work here. I had to get out as much as I could. I was chained in the basement, kicked, punched, drained of my energy, and starved. I had not learned any mage magic until Mr. Holliday's friend taught me how to put up a ward. The judges looked between them.
A ward should have been the first thing you learned.
I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just sort of came out. I would have settled for healing magic, sunlight, anything. She kept me weak, so I couldn't fight back. I pulled my jacket off and lifted my tank over my ribs. My thin arms, my collarbones sticking out, the bruises were all visible. Well, except the one on my hip, but I wasn't dropping my pants in a courtroom. The woman with the long black hair stood.
You say you were chained in the basement?
Yes.
There's evidence of that?
I shrugged. I left her house the day Mr. Holliday hired me and never returned. I'm living in my own home now, but I had to fight her for it. She tried to pull at me.
She summoned you over and over again?
The woman asked. Yes, ma'am. I fought hard. I just wanted my bed and food. Tears threatened to spill down my cheeks. The room grew quiet. A young woman with a short, blonde bob cleared her throat.
Ms. Delacroix, are you telling this panel that your creator taught you nothing in the past nearly 4 years? That she chained you in the basement, not allowing you to bathe or eat?
My gaze fell. Did they not believe me? I took a deep breath, wiped my eyes, and lifted my chin. I've been slave labor and a punching bag since I met her. No more. She nodded, then looked at Doc.
Thank you, Mr. Holliday. Your matter is dismissed. You may go.
Then her gaze fell back on me.
Ms. Delacroix, I would ask you to stay.
I smiled at Doc and mouthed a thank you, tears spilling down my cheeks. He gave me a firm nod, then made his exit. The room remained still for a few moments before Holly entered. She glared at me as she made her way to the podium. They asked her about the allegations. She denied them all. I stood silent, possibly out of shock. Then another man entered with a handful of Polaroid pictures, handed them to the woman with the long black hair, then left without saying a word. The judges scoffed at the photos, heads shaking.
Miss Havens, are you to tell this panel that there's no mattress in your basement? No chains? Nothing?
Well, I can explain.
The man with the salt and pepper hair slammed his fist on the bench and stood.
You will not lie to this panel.
His voice boomed before a bolt of energy slammed into Holly, knocking her off her feet. I stood in shock, hands on my mouth, as I watched her slowly get back to her feet.
She's a child,
she stammered,
who was out of control. I just did what my maker did for me.
Release your bond, immediately!
He boomed again.
Release her or we take your head!
Holly swallowed hard, then her eyes landed on me. I saw raw, unadulterated hatred in them. She said through clenched teeth,
Maya, as your creator, I release you into the world.
Something inside me snapped, like a rubber band had been broken. The man who'd blasted her was leaning forward, knuckles on the wooden bench in front of him. His face was blood red.
Do not move. We will return as we decide the best course of action. And Miss Havens, if even a hair on Miss Delacroix's head is out of place, I will have your head. Do not look at her. Do not speak to her. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
Her voice was low and shaky. We stood in silence. I gripped the podium with my sweaty hands, still shaking from the severed bond. My heart beat so hard I could hear it in my ears. I don't know how much time passed, but when they'd returned, the sound in my ears had eased. The looks on the panel of judges, or whatever they were solemn. After they all sat, a man who'd yet to speak stood. He was thin, brown hair slicked back, bow tie perfectly straight.
Miss Delacroix, you are free to stay in your home and away from Miss Havens for the remainder of your immortal life. Miss Havens, it saddens this panel deeply that one of our own was mistreated in this way. The relationship between creator and learner is the most sacred relationship. One might equate it to motherhood. Since we can no longer procreate in the traditional way, the survival of our race depends solely on creators finding, making, and nurturing offspring. What you've done is, well, quite frankly, it's despicable. Because of this, you are barred from ever creating another Meg.
Holly huffed.
Be thankful that we are not taking your head,
the salt and pepper-haired man said.
Be thankful we aren't taking your immortality.
The panel stood.
I don't want to see you in this room ever again,
the woman with the blonde bob said.
Once is quite enough.
After they left, Holly turned to me, face red.
You'll pay for this.
One day, Holly, one day you're going to look at someone and dismiss them. You're not going to see them as a threat. You're going to do something horrible enough that they take your life, and on that day, I'm going to crack open a bottle of whiskey and dance on your grave after I piss on it. Fuck. Chapter 17. My ears were ringing. My sweaty palms slid against the rails of the podium as I held on. Had I just been freed? For real? Did this just happen? I swallowed hard against the nausea and adrenaline.
Maya, I hope you reap what you have sowed. You're an untrained, uneducated mage. You stand no chance out there without me.
Holly's words squirmed and slithered out of her mouth into my ear. They were full of venom and malice, intended to make me feel small and ashamed. Slowly, I pulled my hands from the podium and stood upright. I forced my lips into a smile, though I wanted to spit in Holly's face. I lifted my chin and looked down my nose at her. I'd rather be an untrained, uneducated mage than a starving, beaten slave, Holly. And what you do not know about me is that I'm a survivor. I'll not only be fine without you, I'll be better than fine. I should thank you, really. Because no matter how bad things get, they'll never be as bad as laying on that filthy mattress, cold and hungry. I will never again fear you. She smirked.
No, but you'll need me.
With that, she turned and waddled her stubby legs out of the room. I rolled my head back and forth, stretching the muscles in my neck and shoulders, then pulled my shoulders back, lifted my chin high as I could manage without looking absurd, and walked proudly out of the building. When I got to my truck, Doc and Sally were sitting on the tailgate, their eyes lifted to meet mine, and apparently I had a shitty poker face because they were all smiles.
It's done then?
Doc asked. I nodded. I'm not much of a hugger, but, can I hug you, please?
Why, darling, nothing would make this cold, dead heart warmer than your embrace.
He stepped in so fast I didn't see it happen. He scooped me up and spun me around. The laughter and scream of joy could not be contained. I had never been a squealer, not even as a teenager, but I'm sure my squeal of delight was heard by dogs for miles away. When Doc sat me down, Sally grinned.
Congratulations, Maya.
Thanks. I don't even know what to do now. I have so much to figure out, but I'm too excited to focus. Doc's head bobbed.
Maya, you're now an immortal. You have all of the time in the world.
I shook my head. No, I don't. I don't ever want to feel hungry again. I want to make sure I can always have food and shelter and a hot bath. Sally grabbed my arm and turned me toward her.
I want you to promise me that if you ever get into a situation where you don't have food, you find him,
she said, pointing her finger at Doc.
I'd say you should find me, but I'm headed to Europe in a few weeks, and I'm not sure when or if I'll return. You find him, Maya. Doc will never let you starve. Will you?
His head moved slightly back and forth.
A friend would never let that happen. I consider myself to be your friend.
I blinked back tears. Thank you. Still, I need to get some sort of plan together. I have some money, but it won't keep me indefinitely. I'm sure I could find some sort of odd job doing something in Atlantis. Sally shrugged.
I was serious about the bounty hunter thing. You're good at finding stuff, and Atlantis only has one, and he's getting tired of it. I'll introduce you. Maybe he'll even train you.
My brows shot up. You're serious? She nodded.
Yes, now enough of this. We're going out for drinks on him,
she said, thumbing at Doc. He smiled wide.
Yes, tonight is my treat, I insist.
Sally cleared her throat.
Maya, there's one more piece of the bond. One that you still have to break, but it will be much more difficult. She has no control over you now, but if you're ever in need, she'll be able to find you.
She smiled sweetly.
From my understanding, you won't want to sever that unless you have to. It could leave a hole in your heart. Just talk to another mage about it when you can.
I'd be happy to endure whatever emptiness that left behind, but for now I was elated to be out from under her thumb. So I got in my truck and followed them to a bar. The sign above the door was in old-world style of lettering reading A Knight's Tale. When we went inside, I was surprised to find it nearly full. We grabbed a high top. When the waitress came by, Doc asked for 3 Bloody Marys.
"It's early,"
he said as he pointed at his watch.
A basket of fries for the lady,
he said as he nodded toward me. I didn't care. I was free. I'd drink kerosene and eat tree bark at this point. I wasn't hungry, but assumed he got it to soak up the alcohol. The waitress came back, setting a basket of fries in front of me. 3 large glasses with celery sticks followed. After the first drink was half down, I looked in Holiday's eyes. I didn't know much, but I knew for a vampire, this was a way to show you trusted them. I don't know why you did what you did, why you helped, but I'm grateful you did. He leaned back and shook his head.
Maya, 100 years ago I would have just turned her into hog feed and set you free. What she was doing was abhorrent. There are laws now, and it's not easy to interfere. I'm sorry it took this long for someone to see what was going on.
Sally put her hand on my arm.
You're not the only one,
she said softly. Then she put her hand on her chest.
I was in a bad situation as well. Doc here is, well, he's like my father now. He isn't my maker, but has stepped up into that position.
I turned to him and grinned. Saving the word, 1 woman a time?
Most of the world would think me a monster, but I dare do all that may become a man.
Please?
Sally waved him off.
Not Macbeth again.
He shrugged.
I'm old. It was a good play.
It was a tragedy,
she said with a laugh.
Let's try to lighten the topic, boss.
Drinks flowed, and by the end of the day, Doc stood guard as Sally and I danced with drunken abandon. I held what was left of 2 fingers of Jameson on the rocks, talking to a very attractive mage guy. He seemed amused by my ramblings.
You're cute and all, just little thin for my taste,
he said with a shrug.
I'm into thicker girls.
I tilted my head. That's so sweet. I could hear my words slurring, but gave not 1 shit. Thicker girls have more to hold on to. I'm all bony. I stood, or rather tried, to stand straight. I'm gonna go back over to my friends. You have a good night, Chet.
It's Chuck, actually.
He laughed. Night, Chucky the Chunky Chaser. I salute you. He was howling with laughter as I stumbled back to Doc and Sally.
She's hammered,
Sally snorted.
So are you,
Doc pointed out. She held out her hands, wrists up.
You want to cuff me?
You, I said, then snorted. Are you flirting? Doc stood from his chair.
Ladies, I do believe that would be our cue to leave.
I leaned on elbow on Sally's shoulder. Well, I've never had a threesome, but okay, I teased. Doc rolled his eyes, then pulled his keys out of his pocket.
Shall we drunk and drunker?
Which one am I? I whisper yelled to Sally.
Definitely drunker.
Chapter 18. It had been a year since the McGarry forced Holly to release me. I stood in my garage, hands on my knees, drenched in sweat. I'd lived as frugally as I could and spent all my time learning my mage magic by those willing to teach me and taking various martial arts classes. Under the advice of my mage mentor, I'd purchased a few handguns and a holster. I was up to a solid 145 pounds, which had required an upgrade to my wardrobe. Leather wasn't cheap, but my closet was full of it. I'd purchased a desk and chair from a resale shop and now had an office. The shop sign had been cheap. I'd traded services with a carpenter, a bear shifter. He had me tail a guy and take pictures of him sneaking around with the sleuth's leader's daughter. I now had a shiny new sign and business cards. I stared at the dummy in front of me, smiling. It was full of some kind of gel, so I didn't break my leg kicking it. It was heavy as hell, though. Too bad I wasn't any good at levitating things. I could make an energy bubble, but couldn't manage to put anything in it heavier than a gallon of water yet. When the doorbell rang, I pulled off the gloves and tossed them on the floor before running through the garage, then the house to the front door. When I jerked it open, Holly stood there.
Hello, Maya.
I narrowed my eyes at her and said nothing.
You're looking well.
She smiled.
May I come in?
I closed the door behind me as I stepped on the porch. Not today. What can I do for you, Holly? She tightened her lips and nodded.
I guess I have that coming.
She took a deep breath and released it.
I'd like to hire you.
I blinked. For what?
I have a client who is looking for a particular relic. It's delicate in nature.
You mean banned? She looked around, then settled her eyes on me.
You know very well what kind of things people ask me to acquire.
Illegal artifacts, things of magical or religious relevance that the authority has deemed too dangerous for people to have. Those were the kinds of things Holly was hired to find, which is why she wanted me in the first place. I stared at her, trying to decide how to proceed, trying to keep my hatred and anger at bay, and trying to decide whether or not to blast her off my porch.
Maya, I know you're angry with me, but I'm trying to make amends. Please, you have a new business, and I'd like to be a client. I can help you, and this information you have about, my business could bury me. I can't think of any way to show you more trust than that.
She had a point. If the authority knew what she was doing, she would die. But I needed the money. I needed a client list. I needed references. I crossed my arms over my chest to keep my hands from doing anything on their own. I'll do it on one condition. Her brows lifted.
That is?
I want to use you as a reference. That means whenever someone calls you for a reference, you give me a glowing recommendation. Agreed?
Yes, of course.
She held out her hand to shake on it. I huffed out a laugh. Our hands would never touch again. I'll swing by the store with my contract.
Thank you, Maya. You won't be sorry.
You might be, I said. I don't come cheap. I smiled at her. See you at the shop. And so Holly was my second client. I still hated her, didn't trust her, but I knew I'd need to swallow my pride. It turned out okay. I found the dagger she was looking for, one that belonged to Julius Caesar. That client knew she'd hired me and recommended me to one of his acquaintances, and so on and so on. Word of mouth spread fast, and before I knew it, I was saving more than I was spending. In between bounty hunting gigs, I spent nights getting an entirely different sort of workout with Victor. That lasted for a year, until he admitted he was getting attached and needed to move on. His mother was after him to find a mate, and she was relentless. I had understood. I wasn't exactly in love with the dragon shifter, but I was fond of him. I enjoyed spending time with him and, to be honest, was going to miss him. But I understood, nonetheless. This was my new life, and maybe, in time, I'd settle down, find a mate, and do the bonding thing. For now, I was happy to be free, unattached, and not settled. This new life was an adventure, one that I was eager to experience. Author's note. Maya has been one of my favorite characters to write, and her backstory was where this series initially started for me. But as my editor said, it wasn't the right place to start. This made it a perfect novella to offer my readers for free. Maya's journey and transformation in the series is integral to the series plot, and seeing the challenges she's faced over and over again helps cement her role. Only those who actually grab a copy of this novella will get references later in the series, like when she mentions riding a dragon in a previous life. Why does she have such a foul mouth? That's her way of keeping people at a distance, which, after reading this novella, you can hopefully see why. Before becoming a mage, she'd already suffered a few hits. Enter Holly and her torture, and Maya has enough to swear about that it makes sense. I truly hope you've enjoyed this free ebook. There are 1 or 2 more freebies planned. Time is always a challenge because writing hours are a precious commodity. As always, I want to thank you for spending your valuable time on my work. I truly cherish each and every fan. If you have this audiobook, that means you're signed up for my newsletter. I will never share your information with any third party.